Good evening. I would like to call our Town of Sidney regular council meeting for Tuesday, May 24th to order at 6 p.m. Councillor Wainwright has provided his regrets and will not be in attendance this evening. He had a prior commitment. Good evening to fellow members of council here this evening, to our presenters, to members of the public in the council chamber, and also to those who may be watching the live web stream or a recording of the meeting at a later date. I'd like to acknowledge with respect that we're holding our meeting this evening in the territory of the Wasanich Nation. We are grateful to be our settler culture to be living in the territory of the Wasanich Nations, to be living, working, and playing. And also we acknowledge with respect that we share in the stewardship of these lands and waters for our current generation and for generations to come. I will look for a motion on the agenda this evening.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. We'll turn to our public participation opportunities. We do have two presenters this evening, but before that, we will turn to our regular public participation period, where we provide an opportunity for members of the public to address council. In a moment, I'll ask anyone wishing to come forward. We don't have any members of the public wishing to address council via Zoom tonight, but we would ask anyone wishing to address to come up, provide us your name and address, and you would have the floor for 4 minutes. And with that, I would ask if there's anyone wishing to come forward this evening. Good evening, Mr. Calveley.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just a very quick comment, because we have
just your name and address, sir.
Sorry, David Calveley, 9655 First Street. All right. Just a very quick comment, because you have a long agenda this evening. But as I've been walking around town recently, it occurred to me that we have, let's say, a recurrence of sandwich boards around the streets. And I just wanted to comment that I think they're really good. I like them. Some of them are very creative. I'm sure there's probably rules against them. And I thought I should make a preemptive comment that let's let some of this exist if we can, before somebody decides to block them or get rid of them or make the place look overruled or antiseptic. They make the place look lived in. I know the wonderful signs that the town puts up, pointing to businesses down side streets. They're really nice, but nobody really notices them. And it happens that businesses move, people get frustrated, etc. I can understand that if there are people with mobility issues on a sidewalk and there's a sandwich board in the way, okay, a quiet word with the operator or the business owner, I'm sure would do something rather than that. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Calveley. I'll ask, is there any other members wishing, or please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor, Councillor. My name is Pat Woodward. I'm 2495 Beaufort Road in Sydney, and I'm here as the owner of Island Treats to acquire our 22 season license for our mobile ice cream vending bikes. We're a locally owned and operated business, and we have environmentally friendly electric ice cream bikes that brings locals and tourists, students, and busy professionals, singles, and families locally sourced gourmet gelatos and frozen treats. As the days grow longer and the restrictions of the pandemic continue to lift, more and more people, residents, and returning tourists alike will be choosing to spend more time outside in enjoying Sydney's parks, paths, and community events. Island Treats can also add to their enjoyment through our array of frozen desserts. We are also encouraged by the growing number of street markets, private events, festivals, and parades, and we are excited to be one of the many new local artisans operating out of Britannia's Bakery, located at 2310 Beacon Avenue. Our bicycles will also be operating on designated bike paths, roadways, parks, and public areas, all the while adhering to the rules, bylaws, and regulations, and will remain mobile at all times on public property, only to stop to make a sale. We will continue to use Bevan, Sidney, and Beacon Avenue as a means of transiting only from north to south in return. Our hours of operation will be 11 a.m. to sunset, weather permitting. Right now, it's not that great. Our bicycles have been adapted to fulfill all road and regulations and adhere to all the bylaws, policies, and procedures put forth by council. We will also be providing a proof of general liability insurance in the amount of $2 million and have the town of Sidney named as co-insured party, and have all our bicycles appropriate approvals from the health department. We look forward to returning this exciting, innovative, and environmentally friendly business back to Sidney and surrounding municipalities. And thank you for your time considering our proposal.
Thank you, Ms. Woodward. Seeing any of the other members of the public in attendance, I will close public participation and we'll now go to our presenters. I'm pleased to introduce and welcome our RCMP Staff Sergeant Mr. Conley to present the quarter policing report for the January to March period. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Nice to see you again. There we go. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Nice to see you again. It's been a bit of a whirlwind day after the long weekend. We've got an airport that shut down, if you haven't heard, so one of those days. My introduction is that the first quarter 2022 policing report includes both combined statistics handled by the detachment as well as a breakdown of specific statistics for Sidney and North Saanich. I'm sure you've had a chance to have a look at that quarterly report. And included in the report is, as you will see, details for the traffic summary and an update on fraud crime and statistics on mental health calls where police intervention has been involved. So in general, just summarizing just a tidbit from that, traffic accidents were down from a year ago. Impaired driving was considerably up. Crimes against persons doubled, and property crime levels declined from a year ago. My report this evening will touch on just 3 areas: an update on the detachment vacancy rate and resource levels, some information on shifting crime trends that we're seeing in the community, and just an update on community policing programs. So with respect to resourcing and detachment vacancy rate, the detachment is currently carrying 3 vacant positions, 2 replacement officers and 1 cadet, one of which is a cadet from depot, are expected to arrive in July. I still don't have any word on the third vacancy carrying. We also, though, have members that will be taking paternity leave in the next couple of months, so we'll be creating some more vacancies. We have another officer that has given their notice of retirement. We'll be only here for another couple of months, creating another vacancy, so we have some more challenges ahead. But we will continue carrying or providing the services. I do want to say that the vacancies do not impact, or I'm not allowing those to impact the 24-hour core policing services, the 24-hour 7-day-a-week coverage. What is impacted, unfortunately, is the specialized services like municipal traffic positions and the community policing positions until we can get ourselves fully staffed. Our major crimes officers are very busy, working on lengthy investigations, one of which involves a drug overdose death that happened in the community, a forcible confinement and sexual assault investigation, a historical sexual assault investigation involving multiple victims, and an integrated investigation that is being carried out with West Shore Detachment. They also are conducting a number of investigations involving the possession and distribution of child pornography. So just to talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing as shifting crime trends in the community. So in recent months and part of the 2022 quarter one period, there has been a shift in crime trends. Some of these patterns evolved during COVID, is what we noticed, while others are a bit more recent. One of which you're probably aware of is the fraud scam issue. So in 2022, we've seen a 110% increase in frauds where there was a reported loss. So not in the number of frauds reported, but where there was an actual loss. So far, or up until the end of March, losses were $65,000 that have been reported. The report speaks briefly about 12 different scams that are repeatedly being used. There are many others, of course. And as you may have been aware, in partnership with Sidney and North Saanich, we launched an awareness campaign in February and March, and had great support from Sidney and great support from North Saanich as we tried to bring a higher level of awareness to the community about this. Those efforts will continue throughout the year. It's one of our strategic priorities, and we will continue to focus on that. I know we've been out and done a couple of presentations in the last couple of weeks. When and wherever we can, we're trying to talk about it. And so that continues. Another trend we're seeing is graffiti vandalism has returned as a problem. We're seeing incidents mainly in the parks, also, on the walls of businesses in the core area of the community, public signs, that sort of thing. The most effective tool that we have is quick removal of graffiti. And I know the Sydney Public Works Department has been very engaged in removal of graffiti from town of Sydney property. We still have to work on the private businesses and stuff to be able to do that as well. I can tell you that we have 3 investigations going on where we've identified taggers of graffiti. So those investigations have not resulted in charges yet, but they may come to that. Impaired driving, another shift. Well, I can tell you that our detachment has really stepped up enforcement efforts to remove drivers who are impaired by drugs or alcohol. That has resulted in, also to mention, I think you're aware, roadside screening devices are our most effective tool. And that results in prohibitions to drivers that are immediate, and also the impoundment of a vehicle for up to 30 days. So in the first quarter, we saw 45 drivers between Sidney and North Saanich in that first 3 months of this year, which is like much higher than we have seen in previous years. But I will say that that's been as a result of a real focus on the enforcement that we have applied. But the message we want is that through road checks and our visibility and any messaging that we can get, that we will be addressing impaired driving. One recent incident in Sydney involved an impaired driver who was involved in a collision with 3 different parked vehicles, left a bit of a path of carnage in his way. So just to speak about what happens sometimes with these incidents. Marine related thefts. So over the winter months and into the spring, the south coast of Vancouver Island experienced an increase in boat, dinghy, boat motor, or outboard motor thefts from local marinas in Sydney and in North Saanich. We have partnered with the West Coast Marine Unit, which is an RCMP unit that covers a large territory, but they have been very engaged, and there's been a lot of property that's been recovered, and there have been charges laid against some individuals that have been involved in some of these thefts. And so we're making some progress in that issue. So that's really just, I wanted to bring awareness to what we see as a bit of a shift in problems that we're dealing with as your policing service. In terms of the community policing programs, I can say that we have great support from the dedicated volunteers that we have. Our Block Watch program continues to expand and into some new neighborhoods. Our coordinator is continuing to send out safety tips and alerts and provide information about where we're seeing some criminal activity. And he keeps the Block Watch captains very informed, and they then distribute to the neighboring residents all through an email connection. The other programs, of course, we have our Project 529 bike registration program, which we like to elevate a bit. Our all valuables removed to do with thefts of vehicles, which I don't know if you remember 2 or 3 years ago, I used to talk about it a lot. Well, we're in a different place now, and it's great to see that there's been a change and a shift there. What it's all attributed to, I can only say, but can't really say, but it is a change that we're seeing. Victim services, we have a volunteer that's now volunteering 1 day a week in our detachment. It's a new thing. We're part of the Greater Victoria Police Victim Services, and that person will be spending every Wednesday in our detachment, working with our officers and taking referrals and all of that. We get great support from Sandwich Peninsula Restorative Justice Program, as well as we refer the suitable cases to them. So that's my update for this quarter, and for the most part, things are going pretty well.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll turn to colleagues if you have any questions. I'll turn first to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Conley, for your report. You answered one of my questions about the impaired driving, so that was great. In terms of it's good to see that total hours waiting on hospitals decreased. And I know that that's an issue. Manpower hours is kind of lost, but they have to wait in the hospital. Just curious, the increase in the amount of time I have to wait, is that sort of related to the staffing shortages at the hospital?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Did you say it decreased?
No, increase in wait time.
Increased, yeah.
In average wait time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought it increased.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So yeah, we're very much impacted by the medical staff shortages that are experienced there. It's hit and miss. Yeah. But you see the wait times are on average between an hour, 2 hours, which is sort of beyond our control to do much about, but it does create issues for us when an officer's tied up down there for that length of time. Yeah. And many efforts have been made to try and address it, but the result, or the only real change has to be from the medical side of it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you for thank you for the report, Sergeant Conley. Just following up on Councillor Garnett's question about the mental health incidents. So when they are taken into your custody, do you take them? Do they go to San Peninsula, or do they have to go downtown to Eric Martin? Or
if they're an adult, they go to Royal Jubilee Hospital, and they have to wait till someone is free to actually take them to be able to process them. So that's the wait time. If they're a youth, they go to Victoria General.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And also just a question about so the impaired driving again, and the increase there. Have you noticed any increase? Is it mainly alcohol? Are we now seeing cannabis as well? Is that any difference there?
Probably seeing the majority, or like the highest percentage, is alcohol-related impairment, but we are seeing some drug impairment, which is a bit different from what we would see years ago. Right. And it's a bit more challenging because we typically need to have an expert get involved with the investigation of that. So,
Right,
and
right.
there are experts in the CRD that we call upon to assist with those investigations when we're dealing with them, but they're a little more time consuming.
Right, okay. And then just one more on that subject, if I may. And I think I might have asked this before. In regards to impaired driving, and you said that the increase could be partly attributed to the fact that you're doing more enforcement. And so I wonder if in the statistics you keep with enforcement, whether you keep any statistics on, say if we pulled 100 people over, what percentage of them would be impaired in some way? And so then that would give sort of an indication maybe of, maybe a truer indication of what the issue is? Is that something that you're able to track or get a sense of?
I think that there are different strategies applied by different officers. The strategy that you're talking about is just doing a road check and sort of filtering all of the traffic and discovering those persons that have been consuming alcohol and driving. But there are other strategies that they apply, and so I think that you know, I guess to say this way, they really hover around certain locations and where they find high incidence of impaired driving, and so that's part of the focus.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
And some of them are incident related, like the motor vehicle crash that I alluded to. You know, sometimes it's an accident and they're discovering the operator of the vehicle being impaired.
Staff Sergeant Conley, thank you for your presentation. On behalf of council and our community, thank you to you and your members for your professional policing services. I think it's important that we have these quarterly reports, not just for the updates, but really I'm reminded each time I read the report and listen to your presentation of the scope of the challenges that you deal with and the challenges, but also at the same time some of them being preventable, such as the fraud, if we can bring the awareness to issues like that. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, a great meeting.
We'll turn to our next presentation, and I'll welcome Ms. Wendy Everson, who will be presenting on her development permit minor application number DPM 0043 at 9840 Fifth Street, Unit 104, to remove a single bus bench on the north exterior of the property. Good evening.
Good evening.
You do have 10 minutes this evening, and we'd be pleased if you would take any questions that council members may have at the end.
We'll be pleased to do so. And thank you for the introduction. Wendy Everson. I am the owner of Opulent Holdings, one of the applicants for this minor variance development permit. The other is the Strata Corporation itself, is the co-applicant on this matter. Am I ready to go? Okay, I just didn't want to... Oh, we're going to scroll. Unfortunately, Officer Conley is gone, but I'd like to introduce the accused. This matter is about a bench, a single bus bench. It's not about the bus stop itself. It is this bench. The variance permit is seeking to remove this single bench. There are two benches at this location. In the corner there is the doorway to 2361 James White Boulevard, which is a commercial unit now currently occupied by Everson Law. Again, the two pictures of the two benches at the transit stop, and the second bench, yes, it's in a covered area and a canopy, which is great. It fronts the window of a second commercial business, but their door, their access point, is not impeded by the bench. This unfortunate second bench does impact the doorway to 2361 James White. Something that will be pointed out in the next photo, just around the corner are two other bus stops with bus benches, single bus benches. At the top is the TD Canada Trust bus bench, or bus stop as I call it, and sitting there are 2 people on a single bus bench at that location. Further down, and this bus stop over in the lower, is that left, right? The lower corner there, I call it the Cloverdale Paint bus stop, is what I consider the highest ridership location next to the TD location, has a single bus bench as well. And this last photo here with this gentleman, his name is John Eaton, at this particular bus stop. I think it was just last year. The bus stop in question at the Beaufort building, the council approved the split of the bus routes at that location. This is the result of those bus routes being moved down that particular block, and Mr. Eden is waiting for a bus without a bench. The impact of this bench, and this is really the important part. It involves a number of interests, not just the commercial location and not just the Beaufort building. To begin with, and I'm standing in the corner of the gentleman who's standing in the first doorway there. Second is that bicycle location. People who are riding the bus who take their bicycles as well to put on the front have no place to put their bicycle. This one is leaning up against the bench and in the door, and this happens quite often. I submit without that bench there is more than 8 feet for the bicycle to be leaned against the wall there in front of the commercial window. What is of greater concern is the lower photograph here and is barrier free. That bus bench prohibits barrier free. This person is actually one of the primary users of this bus stop, and she has no place to put her wheelchair. This is where she needs to park because that other bench impedes and there's no barrier-free location. Yes, it is blocking the commercial door. From my perspective as an employer, my key is the safety of my employees. This door is clearly marked as a fire door exit. And that's a liability. That's a liability for me, and my concern, it's a liability for the town. If that door is blocked and we have an incident, we have both a problem. The other question, when I introduced the accused earlier, is the bus bench. And in the staff report, it mentions about high quality landscaping and furniture. You've seen the bus bench. I leave that to your personal opinion if it's of quality and meets that standard. When I read the report in 2018 on the Downtown Streetscape and Urban Design report and protocols for the town of Sidney, these 2 bus benches don't meet that protocol. Outside of our municipal building here are the beautiful black iron benches, great. I'm on record with the town suggesting similar chairs, similar seating at the bus stop, or matching the bus benches that exist at the other bus stops on Fifth, which is similar to the black iron railing style. In terms of the impediment, again, this is the Sidney Fire Department. This is a report on our office location. This is a report on keeping all of the access doors clear, and it's not only interior, it's exterior. And with that bus bench there, the town of Sidney is not mitigating its responsibility here by having that bench there and promoting, unfortunately, limited egress from our office, that location, and forcing people to stand in that location. Removal of that bench to another location, there's various options. The splitting of the bus routes, as I mentioned, the bus bench going further down, or going to the 2 bus stops that have increased ridership and additional seating there, or retirement of the bus bench. In terms of the Strata Council and some of the residents here, they just wanted me to share their names with you. They did provide the support and wanted it known who their names in support of removal of this single bus bench. Now, in summary, I think I've highlighted most things that would accommodate many interests with the removal of this bus bench. Barrier-free being key, there'd be room. for anybody in a mobility manner to be in front of the windows with lots of location for 2 to 3, whether it's chairs or bicycles. Other stops and riderships would have the comfort of a bus bench, and of course the safety concerns that I've mentioned and the mitigation of those concerns. And I am open to questions.
Thank you, Ms. Everson. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, and in particular the photographs that I am familiar with the area, but the photographs this evening are helpful. Question to you, if the bench were to be removed, the lack of the bench still wouldn't stop anybody from loitering in front of your doorway or parking their bike. So how do you respond to that? I mean, yes, the bench isn't there, but the bench isn't actually blocking the doorway.
The bench is promoting the blockage of the doorway. There's this much between the bench and the doorway. It's mitigation. Prevention, you can't prevent 100%. You can mitigate. You go from this much space to this much space. There's comfort for a wheelchair or 2, and there's certainly comfort for a bicycle. To date, I mean, I've had to open up the door and go, excuse me, can you move? Or I have to bump the door into the person. That's not a pleasant experience.
No, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. I see no other questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Sort of along the same lines of Councillor Fallon, I guess what I'm thinking is if a bench is there, it allows people to sit, and so I would think then there would be less loitering in front of the doorway. Would that not be the case? Like if they can sit, then they don't have to stand in front of the doorway.
The single bus bench, if one is to remain, yes, would allow people to choose to sit. They could stand in front of the window, choose not to stand in front of a doorway. I think at this point in time, they don't have that choice because that bench takes that space. I've heard the word loitering twice now. The concern is not loitering. People are at a bus stop for a certain purpose, to ride a bus. The issue is not loitering.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no other questions, thank you again for the presentation. We'll be coming to the item shortly on the agenda.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. So I'm turning to Section 5 bylaws, and the first is bylaw number 2231, our new single-use plastics bylaw to limit the distribution of single-use plastic items in Sydney. We did discuss the bylaw at a previous meeting, gave it first, second, and third reading. Of course, we have discussed it earlier in our term as well, and we do have a recommendation.
Move the recommendation that the bylaw be adopted.
Second?
Discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I will support, I'm going to support this because I want to see something in place, but I still have issues with 4.1 exemptions E with the linens and bedding because I just don't understand the rationale behind it. But just want to put that out there publicly. But I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll also support it. I just had a question through you to staff. Something I came across actually just this afternoon from, I think it was from UBCM, and they were talking about the province of BC's plan to implement single-use plastic regulation in 2023. And I think from what I understood in it is that the local government legislation and the provincial legislation can support each other. So I guess my question just is, will we be monitoring that provincial legislation when it also comes out in 2023 to make sure that we're aligned, or to see if we need to make any adjustments?
I'll turn to Ms. Clary. Good evening.
Good evening. Through the Mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. Yes, we'll continue to monitor the situations, both provincially and federally, as they develop.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further questions, I'll call all in favor. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we'll turn to bylaw, or 5B, which is bylaw number 2232, our Sidewalk Cafe and Roadside Cafe Regulations and Licensing, amendment number 3. And it is to rescind bylaw 2203, which was amendment number 2. And we have given readings to the bylaw at a previous meeting, and we have a recommendation.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And item 5C is bylaw number 2233, our building regulations, amendment number 12, which is to rescind bylaw 2204, which is amendment number 10. And we have we've given readings at a previous meeting and have a recommendation.
Move adoption.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to section 6, development permits and development variance permits. And item 6A is the matter that we had the presentation on just a few moments ago. Development permit minor application number DP M0043 at 9840 Fifth Street to remove a single bus bench. And I will turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Good evening. I think the presenter presented the issue at hand well. Just to give a little bit of background on the bench and the location there, the development was approved by council in 2003 as part of the development. Sorry?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. As part of the development, a statutory right-of-way was created for the operation and maintenance of a public sidewalk and a public transit stop and layover. So this bus stop is different from other ones in the area because this is where buses tend to stop for more than just a quick stop and picking up passengers. It is a layover location, and there are washroom facilities in the building that were installed as part of the original development for the BC Transit drivers. So as I said, the building was developed around 2003. And I believe Everson Law moved in there in around November 2017. From staff's perspective, we do see value in keeping the bench given the focus on active transportation and encouraging bus ridership. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll first turn to Councillor Garnett and then to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. A couple of quick questions. In the February 21 council meeting, we received a letter and forwarded it to BC Transit. Did staff receive any communication back from BC Transit regarding the letter?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, I'm not aware of any communication back, but it likely would have gone to the engineering department. So maybe Ms. Clary could comment on that.
Sorry, I'm not sure what letter you're referring to. Was it about this bus, the particular bench, or the bus stop in general?
In the staff report, there just makes mention of the in February of 2021, when there was a request from the applicant to remove the bench, that we made a resolution to receive the letter and forward it to BC Transit. I was wondering if BC Transit had made any comment with regards to the letter that we sent them.
Not that I'm aware of at this time.
Okay. One more question, if I may.
Please.
When being out there and looking at it the other day, I noticed that there's probably a good 15 to 18 inches towards the right-hand side of the bench on the right-hand side to the wall, and probably 2 inches between the two of them. Is there a reason why the benches aren't pushed completely over and actually touching each other to create maybe an extra 2 feet of space?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, I can only speculate that might be due to maintenance and servicing of the benches and just cleaning them. But again, that would be better answered by the Public Works Department. So we'd have to look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I will make an exception and allow Ms. Everson if she might have an answer.
Thank you for that. I've requested that the town move those benches closer together in the past, and they have. Those photos I've shown and still show the same occurrence of people standing there. More distance is required, more space.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Ms. Everson suggested that that bench could be moved to a couple of alternate locations that she thought look like better bus stops. Is that something that we have within our power as a town to do, to decide where we can move bus benches if that was something we did, or would BC Transit have to be consulted on that? Do they have any input on that?
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, Ms. Clary could speak to BC Transit involvement in that. This specific location is governed by the statutory right-of-way on title that's between the town and the developer at the time. So the town maintains and places those bus benches. So it would be up to council to approve the removal of them or moving them somewhere else. I guess the issue with that is that the other bus stops are just a stop, and this is the layover location where the bus will be sitting for a few minutes before it continues on its way.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. Through you to staff, what are the requirements from safety and building requirements for furniture and emergency exit? Like, is there a specific distance? Does this particular bench meet that? I'm looking for clearance, right? Clearance around a doorway.
Sure. We'd have to look into the building code and get back to you about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to staff, then just to clarify, you're saying the statutory right-of-way has been on title since 2003. I take it that the physical area where not just the bus stop is, but where these benches are located are included as a part of that right-of-way?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And the photo that is accompanying the staff report on page 8 of 8, taken from the interior of the office looking towards the bus stop. I take it that's the same doorway that Ms. Everson had illustrated in her presentation and identified as an emergency exit. So this is one of the access and egress to this business location. It's not the only one. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. Those photos were provided by the applicant, Ms. Everson. The main entrance, I believe, is a different doorway into the commercial unit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fallon?
Thank you, yeah. Just one point I would like to make. In the package that was provided to us on page 8 of 8, there are a series of photographs showing the fire exit, and I note that there are, and one of the concerns that have been brought up by the proponent on this particular one was that this is a fire exit and needs to be kept clear, and that there are definitely things from the office that are blocking the fire exit. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll turn to Councillor if there are no further questions from staff to make a motion.
I'll make a motion. I'm going to move that DP minor application be approved and that an alternate location for this bus bench be investigated.
A second for discussion.
Mover and a seconder. I'll turn to the mover, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, I agree with staff that, you know, as part of our active transportation plan, we need bus benches. However, I find Ms. Everson's rationale for why this particular bus bench is probably not ideally situated quite compelling. That bicyclists are going to be putting their bikes right in front of her door is obvious, and that people on scooters and scooter users use the bus a lot because they don't drive, have nowhere to park in this location, and accessibility to bus is a big part of that, having that transportation access. Also, this is one of the main routes for people when they're going to and from the ferries, and I know people always have luggage getting on and off at these locations, and people with luggage are going to stand and put it right there. I can completely understand why this would be a poor location. That this is a layover stop, I don't think affects why it would need 2 buses, because the purpose of the layover is for the bus drivers to use the washroom, or they, they'll sit on the bus and take their break. They aren't necessarily using that bench. It's not creating additional need for bench space. And I think that probably there are other locations in town that lacking benches, we could move this one and solve 2 problems at once, so.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Until.
Yeah, thank you. I'm inclined to listen further to colleagues' additional comments. I think what resonates with me is certainly the concern presented from the business owner that as an emergency exit, it could be blocked, and I'm not referring to an individual waiting for the bus so much as objects like bicycles, as we can see in the one photo on page 7, that would be of concern, absolutely. So I'm certainly sympathetic to the challenges that this business is facing with respect to the location of this bus bench, but I'm also keenly interested in making such amenities available to people who are traveling on public transit, so that they can have as easy a course of transit as possible at this location and others. So keen to hear what my colleagues think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I understand partly some of the concern about the blocked doorway, but I guess what I'm thinking also is that in the event of an emergency and people had to use that exit, if there was a bike or a scooter there, it's not that people leave their bikes and scooters and then they walk away. So it's not a permanent structure. So I think in the event of an emergency and somebody had to leave the building and fire alarms were going off, my anticipation would be that people would be getting out of the way pretty quick. It would be something different if it was something like a car that was, blocking an exit to a building. So I think that's something that can be dealt with. I also agree with staff comment about, I don't know that removing that bench is going to stop people necessarily from standing in front of the doorway. So it is an area that's a significant exchange for the bus. So it's some place where there's going to be more people. We're trying to encourage more people to use the bus. And so it's going to be the case that there's just going to be more people there, and they may end up standing in front of the door. And I don't know that, I'm not convinced that removing a bench is going to have an impact in resolving the issue. So I'm kind of leaning right now to not supporting the motion as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett and Councillor Fallett.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to, we're going to hear back, I'm going to hear back, but I think part of it could be alleviated if the benches were just, if it's able to be happening, to have the benches just moved over would create a fair bit of space from what I kind of visualized when I was there looking at it the other day. I understand the concerns of the proponent. That would be frustrating for sure. I also know that people still like to have their spacing. We're not done COVID yet, and even though it's outside, people like to be apart. I like that room on the benching. The other thing is that it's not just transit users that use those bus stops. I've actually seen people who live in the neighborhood there sit on those bus stops. Elderly people just sitting to rest on their way home or whatever have you. So that's another use that's there. I guess for me it just comes down to civic responsibility again, and why somebody would think it would be okay to put their bike in front of a door, or in this case the lady doesn't have room for the scooter, and if we move over, but a bike, or to stand in front of a door that's a door that people come in and out of. I would hope common sense would rule the day, but apparently, judging by these pictures, it doesn't always happen. So I can understand why the proponent is frustrated by this, because it would be an issue. And I'm not certain where I stand on it. There's others to speak, but I do know those benches are used, and they serve a purpose outside of transit. And as I said before, I think part of a solution might be just to, if it's possible, to move them as far over to that other wall as possible, because it gains a fair bit of space, and certainly would help the individuals on scooters for sure. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fell?
Thank you. Yeah, I think if there's room for the benches to be shifted to the west, then I would appreciate if that can be done. As has been noted regarding access to the doorway, that things aren't being stored there for any length of time, and you know, people aren't leaving their bikes or whatever. So that part has been addressed as far as I'm concerned. And I think much like the owner of the premises themselves, they put things temporarily in front of the door and move them again when need be. And that's no different than somebody outside. Removing the bench is not going to stop anybody from blocking the doorway. That won't change. It may give more room, but I don't think it will change things. So I'm not in support of having the bench removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fellett. My comments are going to start in a slightly different perspective, and that is, we've seen in the staff report, and we can certainly appreciate that the perspective of streetscape in the public right-of-way and providing a bench for both transit use and general pedestrian use. And the what we've had in our official community plan and other plans to provide those amenities in our downtown streetscape environment. But the perspective is also from the tax-paying commercial business and the fact that they're conducting business and serving their patrons. And I can't think of another location, but I think an important consideration at the time the original development was considered was that a business would have patrons using that doorway, whether it was access or egress. And quite frankly, I can't really picture either BC Transit or the town recommending a bench less than 2 feet from an entryway or a doorway in a business in downtown Sydney. I just don't think of another example. So I think it's important to look at it from that perspective. We've talked about it being an emergency exit and being clear, but as the Ms. Everson mentioned during her presentation, she has patrons leaving that entrance or leaving that exit that have nothing to do with an emergency. And quite frankly, a business shouldn't have to bump a door into somebody, whether it's a wheelchair or a person standing on the sidewalk, to allow a patron to exit the premises. So I don't think it was reasonable to have the bench there in the first place. And I think if you look at elsewhere, and we did have some slides both in the package and in the presentation, but if you take a look at 2 of the locations that were presented in the slides and locations that I've looked at over many, many years are the 2 busy transit stops at Fifth and Beacon. The one that is on the south side by the paint shop is actually a double wide shelter. The bench is actually, there's a 6-foot bench and then there's a 3-foot bench. And I paused when I first noticed it quite some time ago. Why didn't they just put a full bench there? Well, the reason is to leave 3 or 4 feet to allow a person in a mobility device, whether it's a scooter or a wheelchair or what have you. If you look at the stop outside Canada Trust, it is a 1.5 width shelter. There's a 6-foot bench, and then there's a 3 or 4 foot space for the same person or for the same purpose of allowing somebody in a mobility aid or otherwise to stand in that space. So we see 2 of our busiest transit stops at Beacon and Fifth with 1 bench or 1.5 bench. And I can see that at the time it looked pragmatic in putting 2 benches in this location on Bevan, but quite frankly, I think 1 bench is going to serve. In terms of whether it will make a difference or not, I think Ms. Everson has addressed that in saying you will mitigate it. If you leave 6 feet between the bench and the doorway, people who stand in front of the doorway will have an opportunity to not stand in front of the doorway. Will it be 100% of the time? Perhaps not, but I think you will mitigate it to some degree. And quite frankly, taking a look at the space, which is less than 2 feet between the edge of the bench and the doorway, you can't get a wheelchair there. You can't get a scooter there. When you look at the entire area, so from, you can see the bump outs in the building on either side of the doorway. And so there are the bump outs, the physical bump outs of the building that come to the property line. There is only room. There is 1 foot between the bench and the one on the right that a colleague mentioned earlier. A very, very small space now between the 2 benches, and as I say, less than 2 feet to the doorway. And then on the other side of the doorway is the other bump out. And that is what has a 3-foot awning above it that is providing some protection. And it doesn't provide nearly the same protection as a bus shelter does, because the canopy is actually 10 or 12 feet in the air. So I think from a practical standpoint and looking at it from all sides, I think it's reasonable to remove this bench from this area, and I don't think it's going to detract from the pedestrian orientation of that location, and I don't think it's going to impact users significantly at the transit stop, but I think it will mitigate the unforeseen circumstances of the doorway being blocked for a significant amount of time. With that, I'll turn to colleagues for a second time. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I think you covered my points very well about mitigating people standing at the stop. People will probably still sometimes stand in front of the doorway, but as a frequent bus rider, this and some of the comments you made about how this was clearly not designed in a way we would now for a commercial business, and from their perspective, having those 2 benches in that location the way they are, and the issues that Ms. Everson has brought up with the way they're placed, also looks to me as though it was not designed by somebody who is familiar with the way people stand at bus stops or the way people use bus stops either. Just the points you brought up, it's very obvious to me that there needs to be more room there, just for the way people tend to stand at bus stops and have the scooters and the bikes and things like that. So from that perspective, I think it was just shouldn't have been done this way in the first place, and we have an opportunity to fix something that was actually not well designed for its use. And to Councillor Garnett's point about making sure we still have enough seating for pedestrians downtown because people are using it, I think that in moving this bus stop, that would actually be better, or not this bus stop, this bench would be better for increasing seating availability, because I know when I was pregnant and couldn't walk very far at a time, I never got to a place where benches were and was unable to sit down because there was too many people on the benches. It was that there was too big of a gap between where benches were. So being able to have a bench in an alternate location where there currently isn't one, I think would probably facilitate better seating for people who have mobility challenges as well.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just one more thing is on my mind is the fact that we know that we have an aging population in Sydney, and so they're not necessarily all using mobility aids, but they need a place to sit down, and so that's kind of in my mind as well, and wanting to preserve a bench for that aspect, that we're losing places for people to sit and waiting for the bus, and just wanted to throw that out for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, we have the motion on the floor. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? The motion is tied. The motion is defeated. So we have no motion on the floor. I'm going to suggest, Council, that if we put the alternative motion on the floor, we're going to wind up with a 3-3 vote again, and the motion will be defeated, and we won't have a decision this evening. So I'm going to turn to the corporate officer, but make the suggestion that we refer this to the next council meeting where we have 7 members of council in attendance. Either that or we have to go back and re-debate and try and change one of our minds. Does that require a motion to refer to the next meeting?
Yes, please.
I assume we'll make that motion.
Second.
Any
Did
discussion?
you move it? Sorry.
So I've moved it.
Yeah,
yes.
second. Thanks.
Thank you. It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is item 6B, which is the Victoria Airport Authority Development Referral at 2065 Beacon Avenue West. For members of the public, that location, as it indicates in the report, is beside the newer Titan Boats facility on Beacon Avenue West. This development application referral is to construct 2 buildings, one 3-story self-storage facility with office and a 1-story plus mezzanine strata warehouse facility. And I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Hello again, Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. All right, so this is a referral that we received from the Victoria Airport Authority, as you mentioned. Thank you. The town has a standing memorandum of understanding with the VAA, the Airport Authority, regarding land use and development guidelines and how these referrals are handled. So staff has reviewed a number of these over the years. The most recent one was for the York Realty facility, now under construction for the Amazon facility there on the west side. So this site here is on the south side of Beacon Avenue West, just to the southwest of the intersection with Gallaran and Beacon Avenue West. As you mentioned, it is for a self-storage facility. So the staff report covers how the proposal complies with the VAA land use guidelines and how it compares to the town's regulations. Just a reminder that the town's regulations in this case do not apply because it is federal land, so the development does have to comply with the VAA standards. So there is a staff recommendation at the end to reply to the VAA with comments on the proposal, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can, but this is a VAA referral, so thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to colleagues and I'll begin with Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Through you to staff, a couple of questions, if you can answer them, kind of realizing it's not within your parameters totally here. Given that the roundabout and realignment is in the design phase, do we have any concerns about where the building footprint is with regards to what might come forward?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, it looks like, going by the lease lines that are shown on the drawings, they've taken into account the layout of the roundabout, and the building is well within the lease area, and there shouldn't be any conflict in terms of the roundabout layout.
Okay. Sorry, if I may, just another question. I guess I'm a little concerned. In the staff report, it mentions there's insufficient access drive aisle width. And in the report from urban to town, it mentions the same thing, that there won't be two-way. But I don't see that as one of the recommendations from staff addressing that in terms of maybe adjusting the footprint of the building in phase 3 for storage to allow for a two-way aisle, drive aisle. Can you comment on that, please?
Just only briefly that I think they're not expecting high traffic volumes on the site, so they didn't highlight that as a major concern.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor. Glad we have a cheat sheet here because I was having trouble with my mic. Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, through to staff, it's really not clear to me how much office space there is here. And I say that because for a self-storage facility, my assumption would be the office space requirement would be quite limited. But I see on the schematic, if I look at page 12 of 14, looks like 2 separate office areas. And then following on page 13 of 40, that one of those offices carries through to the second floor. Whether that's a separate office or the same office over 2 stories, I don't know. And I'm asking, I guess, in relation to parking, because it's one of the concerns addressed here that is in part managed through the expectation that a self-storage facility has very limited parking requirement generally compared to most commercial type uses. But if this is, you know, office space to be sublet or rented in some other way to another party, then that may confound the parking scenario. So I wonder if we can get any clarity from staff on that, please.
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, I'm looking at the drawings here in the drawing set. And on page A101, which is page 11 of 40 of the PDF file for this report, it says, just in the summary on the page, it says there's a total office area of 344 square meters. And it looks like they've allocated 13 parking spaces for that office use. And then if you look at drawing A201, the ground floor plan, that's page 12 of 40 in the PDF file. It looks like I see 2 office areas there. But yeah, we'd have to look at it and contact the VA for more information on that. Then I see a little bit more on the 2nd and 3rd floor plan in that southeast corner of the site. It says office 2nd floor only. Kind of the southeast corner of the L-shaped building. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I had similar questions about the parking. So I see, you know, what the square footage is. I guess I'm trying to get a sense of how many different businesses are going to be operating there. So it looks like these are going to be, there's a number of separate units is how I understand it. And so do we have a sense of what sort of businesses might go in there? I know that warehousing facilities just specifically don't have necessarily high traffic, but it looks like these are meant to be regular sort of businesses. Is my understanding correct about that?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, unfortunately, we'd have to contact the VAA or the urban systems there, the consultant, to find out more about that and get back to you.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, so I prefer to have that information before confirming what our concerns might be. Another thing, I just sort of a related factor, not necessarily to this proposal, but I notice in their letter that they say we have 40 consecutive days to respond. And I believe when we looked at this last time that it ended up, it's actually 40 business days. So I'm wondering, have we corrected that with them? And so have we got a little bit more time than we normally would?
Yes, it is 40 working days.
Okay.
So that's the understanding between both parties there.
Okay, good. In his letter, he mentioned consecutive days, so that's why I brought it up. So yeah, I do have concern about the shortfall of the spaces, and so I'd like some clarification on the use of those units and a bit more justification for why such a significant reduction in the spaces.
I'd just like to add in that might not be a question that the VAA or Urban Systems can answer. They may not know at this point in the project how many businesses would be going in there. So I might not be able to reply with any specific information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just before turning to Councillor Fallett, just a part of it, it's more of a comment attached to the previous question, and that is I'm turning on to page 20 and 21 of the PDF package. Page 20 is seems to be is the plant list, and I'll have some comments about that next in my speaking turn. But to Councillor O'Keefe's point, one of the things I noticed in the sign, which I found a bit odd, but from the previous question we don't have the answer. The signage indicates that this is the Beacon West Industrial, or whatever the name of the company is going to be, it's going to be their self-storage, and then Beacon West Industrial. And then it has room for 5 tenants to put their signage there. And the way it's presented in the report, or sorry, in the submission, but also in the staff report, is that yes, there is self-storage, and that presumably that would be leased by members of the public, but then there will be a number, and I think the number is 5 strata spaces, and so I'm gathering these 5 tenants who own those stratas would be able to put their name up there. The question, I guess, is, or the comment is that if this is a strata storage unit for business ABC, for their purposes, why are they putting their name up on a sign on Beacon Avenue West? Are they expecting clients to access this storage space? And to me, that doesn't sound like a storage space. It would seem to me that the company would just be accessing their own storage space, and why do they need their name on a sign? I'll just leave it there, and as you've indicated already, we may not have an answer to that from the VAA or the proponent. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett, and I'll leave my further remarks a bit later.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to staff. So recommendation 1 is about the north elevation be modified to increase the visual interest. That really needs to be addressed because we're seeing now more and more buildings. I mean, it used to be that there were a couple of industrial buildings and it wasn't such a big thing. Now we've got the Amazon building coming up, and the impact of warehouse style architecture is becoming really, really clear. My concern is that this is not in the middle of nowhere. This is still well within our town. It is the boundary between 2 municipalities and right next door to a residential neighborhood. And I would really like to urge them to pull out all the stops and do something remarkable and something noteworthy, that the people who live in the neighborhood and travel that corridor can say, yeah, it's an industrial building, it's a storage building, but it's an interesting building. So my comment to you to pass on is that they do something innovative with it, and doing some articulation on the walls isn't enough from my perspective. The second...
Sorry, if I just might interject for a moment. I certainly appreciate your comment, and I'm sure Council finds it helpful, and as staff do. But we are at a point of questions now. And
So,
I
yes.
think comments can, we can refer to those once we have a motion on the floor. But I'll turn to Mr. Humble. And I'll turn to Mr. Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've partly addressed my comment or my concern, but certainly I would encourage, I mean, you see there's recommendations from staff regarding the proposed development, and it also deals with addressing the north elevation be modified to increase the visual interest. So fundamentally, if council wants that language strengthened or changed, it wouldn't be really appropriate for staff to pass along those comments, but it should come through a council resolution as part of the referral process.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Appreciate that. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Mr. Humble made my point. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to next speaker. Sorry, I'll turn to first-time speakers. Any first-time speakers? I do have a question, and the question goes back to the page 20 of 40 that showed the plant list. And the staff report makes reference to the fence, and there is a recommendation with regards to the perimeter fence be removed or modified to provide a densely landscaped visual barrier. My question is when you look at the siting of the fence, it is, and I don't know what the measurement is, but it's X feet, 10 feet or 15 feet, whatever it is, from the building edge on Beacon Avenue West. Is there a minimum distance required between the edge of a building and a fence?
The minimum distance would be the minimum setback from their lease line area, which would be in their design guidelines. I'd have to check that.
Okay.
But no, there's no other regulation for the distance between a building and a fence, separate from between a building and a property line.
The reason for my question is it's not showing a hedge in front of the fence, it's showing plantings. And I appreciate the staff recommendation. I think particularly given the orientation of the building on Beacon Avenue West, which Councillor Fella commented on, is that we do want to emphasize the importance of landscaping, whatever the building design will be. Does staff feel from a landscaping perspective that if that fence was there would be room for those plantings, and maybe they're trees, but for there also to be a hedge along the fence? So there could be a hedge and trees? Or is it, does staff suggest it would have to be one or the other?
There could potentially be room for both. We'd have to look at it and talk to their planning consultant about that. The hedge and the screening was raised in the staff report as not complying.
Right.
The bottom of page 4 of the staff report says the proposal does not, that's for screening the outdoor areas. But yeah, it is not screened according to their bylaw requirements.
Okay, thank you. And just to confirm, which I think we have the understanding of, is that apart from the recommendations that staff have made and council will move forward in some fashion this evening, the staff report would accompany those recommendations?
No, the applicant has already obtained a copy of the staff report. We sent them, as always, we send the applicant a link to the council agenda so they see the staff report there. We don't send the staff report along with the letter of response from council. And just a reminder that the VAA can choose to waive their own requirements there. Sydney's requirements don't apply in terms of screening and fencing.
No, we do understand. Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor, second-time speakers now. Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. And further to the mayor's point regarding number 2, is it possible to put, are convex mirrors allowed in a commercial situation like this? My concern is the visibility for pedestrians and cyclists, the users of the flight path. And I know from some of the other places along Mills Road that have got vegetation, which I love the vegetation, but it makes it very difficult to see when vehicles are leaving the site. And so if we're going to be looking at landscape barriers here, would mirrors be a legal and safe thing to put in for users of the flight path?
Through the mayor to Councillor Fellett, that could be something that council chooses to include in the comments back. Yeah.
Okay, so but there's nothing as far as our bylaws or safety from ICBC or the police that convex mirrors can be used in situations like this?
I can't speak to ICBC or police requirements. Our bylaws don't mention convex mirrors as a way to meet a bylaw requirement, but it doesn't have to meet our parking bylaw requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. To staff, do we know why a representative from the Airport Authority wasn't here this evening to answer any questions?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, they're not required to make a presentation. I think they're probably watching the live feed of this online, but yeah, the VAA nor their consultant is required to make a presentation or attend the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I understand they're not required to. It seems like a fairly significant undertaking, and we've had a few questions here that I think they could have probably shed some light on. I see a reference in the package to MGF Project Services. Do we know, is that the developer or is that the end user of this facility?
I don't know the answer to that, no.
So we don't know, do we know if it's being built on spec or if it's purpose designed for someone?
Again, I don't have that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a question on this process through you to staff. So I'm struggling because we don't know the answer to some of these things. If there was a response, maybe it wouldn't be a concern. And I gather there's not enough time to get those responses back to us, is that correct? Before we send our formal response?
The 40 days does take us to mid-June. So their staff, we could look into these things and report back to council at the next meeting. It does help to get the questions in advance so that we can look into them though, so.
Okay.
Okay, so one option for council is to refer this to the June 13th meeting, which would be within the deadline, Ms. Verhagen? I'm sorry, I know it's in the report, probably.
Yes, I believe it is the deadline. I believe it might be the next day after June 13th. So that would probably take us right to the date.
Okay.
To the end of the 40 days.
Okay, but just a comment is that in answer to staff's answer to at least some of the questions has been the answers to our questions may not be available. If this is being built on speculation, we aren't going to know about tenants or particular usage necessarily. So I appreciate, sometimes more information, you desire more information, but it may not be available. So I would take that into consideration if we are contemplating a referral to a further meeting. So my suggestion is that we actually move forward with starting with the staff recommendation, any amendments we wish, and through our deliberation on particular points. If we feel we're not comfortable as a council moving it forward tonight, then we would refer it with specific questions to a future meeting. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. A question actually to you.
Sure.
When we're moving the recommendations, is it possible to move the overarching one and have a discussion on that before we go into the individual 8 recommendations?
I would suggest we vote on them one at a time. So there is the introduction, if you will. Yeah. And then there is 8 specific recommendations. I would suggest that we move the first part and number 1 together. Okay. If we have any amendments, we can proceed with amendments, and then we can continue on. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you once again. Just another question through you to staff. In the recommendation, it talks about that we have a statement of no significant concerns.
Councillor O'Keefe, I'm going to interject.
Okay.
If it's a comment about that, we can leave it until the motion is on the floor.
It was a question. I was asking staff a question.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, in regards to that terminology, when we say no significant concerns, but we clearly have some concerns. So I'm wondering if there's something in the MOU that sort of captures or describes what that no significant concerns actually means.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, that's not required wording in the motion. Council can choose to remove that and just reply with comments. I think that was more the nature of council's reply on the York Realty referral for the Amazon site. So no, it's not required, just say no significant concerns. That can be changed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you. I'm prepared to move the opening recommendation that council directs staff to reply to the Victoria Airport Authority regarding the development referral for property at 2065 Beacon Avenue West, self-storage facility and strata warehouse, with the following comments for consideration by the VAA. Did you want me to pause there? I know
you
Councillor
can
Garnett
proceed with the
to
first recommendation.
Thank you. 1, that the north elevation be modified to increase visual interest along the building face fronting Beacon Avenue West.
Okay, so if there's any discussion on the opening sentence or the first recommendation. We have it seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. So I'm looking for some direction on the wording of that. How can we rephrase that so it comes out? I mean, I'm not looking for anything specific because I don't have anything specific, but I'm looking for something that the building has more personality and humor and humanity and isn't just a flat-looking industrial building. And I don't think modified to increase visual interest is a strong enough statement, but I don't know how to phrase that differently.
I'll turn to Mr. Humble, and then Councillor Duncan may have a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess if council wishes, they could indicate that they have concerns, or use the descriptor, significant concerns associated with the lack of visual interest along the building face fronting Beacon Avenue, and that consideration be given to better articulating that elevation. If you start talking about, you know, other descriptions such as, you know, using more colorful language to describe it, it gets challenging, because then it's based on interpretation. But you might want to start by indicating that you've got major concerns associated with the lack of visual interest along that elevation.
Okay, so perhaps the best way I can describe it is that I would like to take the industrialization away from the building and have it more reflective of the fact that it is within a residential and a downtown core.
So we're talking about, you know, sorry, Mr. Mayor, so we're talking about fit and compatibility and those kinds of things, right? But yeah.
I think you know, there is in the staff report there is the section where it indicates that the Beacon Avenue, the building closest to Beacon Avenue is in essence turned around. But when you look at the design of the overall property, you can see that there's a functionality to that, and therefore you get it not fitting with our development permit guidelines in terms of, you know, what would create visual interest on the front. So you know, I think yeah, I'll leave my comments there, and you still have the floor, and then I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
No, I'm looking for something. I've been trying all day to come up with a way of saying it, because it's nothing concrete. It's nothing specific that I want to say, you know, paint blue tiddlywinks on the wall. That's not what I'm looking for, right? And I don't want it to be prescriptive, but I would like to see something that isn't an industrial warehouse.
We can make it prescriptive. We are aware that these are recommendations to the airport authority that are considered by the proponent and the authority. They are only recommendations. So I'll turn to Councillor Duncan, who may wish to speak to the same matter.
Yeah, thank you. I guess the big question through to staff then first is, do we have design guidelines in the Westside Local Area Plan? I seem to recall there being, I mean, there's drawings, right?
Ms. Reagan?
Yes, we do have design guidelines in the Westside LAP, and we have industrial design guidelines as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think perhaps to Councillor Fellett's point, in the Westside Local Area Plan, I mean, I remember seeing they had, you know, examples of what that should look like. That what we're looking for is something that will actually be consistent with the mixed use of that area. That it's not going to be, we're not looking for just industrial warehouses, but there's going to be residential and some mixed commercial as well. And we would like this building to be consistent with that long-term plan and what's currently there. And there are, so hopefully we could perhaps just refer them to look at that Westside, the local area plan, and the design guidelines that were created for that mixed use.
So again, I think it's the for council to come up with the wording, whether it's adding to it and making reference to the West Local Area Plan, but I will leave it for council to actually propose an amendment if they so wish. I'm sorry, Councillor Keefe, did you have a question or comment? Or
Yes.
want to deliberate?
Yes, let's deliberate. I was going to agree with Councillor Duncan. I was also thinking along the lines of the Westside Local Area Plan. So I might propose that we add to, if Councillor Fallett is comfortable with that, adding something in that says,
Can I make a
Sure.
quick suggestion?
Yes.
and play with it? Is leave the wording as it is, and after the semicolon or right afterwards, consistent with the local West Lap guidelines.
yes, I'll move that.
Consistent, so
I'll
an amendment to
second that.
add at the end, consistent with the West Lap guidelines. You're moving that?
Yes.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
We have a seconder. And so now we're discussing the amendment. Councillor Until?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll support it, but ultimately, you know, I think the language in here, we were recommending increasing the visual interest, you know, was in keeping with feedback we've provided previously. And I don't think this as is proposed, is out of character. For example, the new Titan Boats building, which is, you know, immediately next to it. So I think we want to be somewhat careful what we're suggesting, in that we've just gone through this process this council has with that particular project, the Titan Boat building, and it is, you may recollect, it's sort of industrial in its appearance, facing Beacon, and it's very much, it's finished interior looking towards the airfield, and the Malahat is where their boardroom and their offices are, etc. So we may be creating two sets of standards here that I think we want to be careful of, but I will support the motion as amended. Thank you.
The amendment, okay. And Councillor Fallon?
Just to carry on with that and for clarification, I'm aware we've got some existing buildings. Titan Boats has the interest because their shed doors are usually open and there's something to see. We're not looking at the blank walls. And if I'm thinking self-storage warehouse style, they're pretty uninteresting and they're pretty static. And given that right across the street we have Amazon, which I mean, it still remains to be seen, but I think it's not necessarily an inspired piece of architecture. And I'm thinking about, this is not out in the backwoods of the peninsula. This is right in our community. And because now we're getting more and more of it, and I see the corridor impact, I would like to ask this developer to start thinking a little bit outside the box. And I think if there's respect given to the West Lap, I'm comfortable with that and hope that they can come up with something interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question on the amendment. All in favour? And none opposed. The motion carries. So we're back to the amended motion. Councillor Garnett.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I have some comments, but that's why I wanted to just sort of relate to the preface, the preamble that was part of it. It's not specifically to the recommendations. And it centers around the insufficient access drive aisle and the fact there won't be two-way traffic. And when I look at the Watt traffic study component of the agenda, I noted that they talked quite a bit about the left and right turns coming out of the site. But what was absent from me, strangely, was left and right turns going into the site. And so I had a real struggle with that, because if you go further into the discussion, they mentioned that the majority of the turns coming out of the site would be turning right. So naturally, I deduce from that the majority of the turns going into the site should be left. And that is an issue in terms of traffic flow on that street. Monday to Friday is an extremely busy section of road. During work hours, it's nonstop. I've been there on the past couple of weekends during lunch hour, and it's a steady stream of traffic. It just literally never lets up. I remember turning left from off of Gallery onto Beacon, and I had to wait for 12 cars to go by on a Sunday afternoon. So, and that doesn't tie into effect the 150 delivery vans from Amazon coming and going at who knows what time. They're going to be going down that stretch and turning, when they come back, coming in closer to Titan Boat. So I'm not sure if not having that two-way aisle and having a car, may not happen that often, but you could have a car coming out of there turning right and a car going turning left going in, and it could considerably cause a backup all the way to the roundabout once it's presented. So I'm just not sure where to go with that. I see that as a safety issue.
I can make a suggestion, Councillor?
Sure, absolutely.
So we appreciate the point you've made, and may want to bring forward in terms of a resolution. I would suggest that given the 8 recommendations that we have, that's not clearly addressed in those recommendations.
Right.
So it wouldn't be an amendment to one of these 8. It would be a supplemental recommendation if we chose to.
Yeah, I just didn't know where to bring it up, actually. That's why I was trying to, that's why I just wanted to know if we could have just done the preamble first and then gone into the recommendations, because there was things I wanted to speak to that aren't in the recommendations.
No, but
generally.
But I don't know the preamble is the place to speak to it. I mean, you can.
I was just trying to find a place to put it in there. That was the issue.
Fair enough. My suggestion is it's an additional recommendation.
Okay, so what about speaking to overall general things? When would you prefer that to be discussed? You prefer that after all the recommendations are put forward?
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I appreciate your question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to separate number 1 from the preamble.
Okay.
Okay, and so we will come back to that next after we approve the preamble.
Okay.
And I appreciate that you may have questions or comments of deliberation of general comment, and that may lead council to want to make additional recommendations afterwards, but I would suggest that if they're not clearly amendments to the 8 recommendations, that after we approve the preamble and go through the recommendations, we consider other recommendations. So if you wish to speak to just the preamble in a overall to the project and things that might be an additional recommendation, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So that was one of my concerns. The other concern I had centered around, I think, well, Councillor O'Keefe brought it up, the fact that there were so many areas where it doesn't meet the requirements of Sidney was a concern for me in terms of the overall recommendations. I guess I also wanted to speak to the fact that staff in the staff report, they spoke to the fact there's no significant landscaping or trees. There is a strand of trees, just want to point that out, and for me, every tree is significant, so I think that's important to put out there. But I think, for me, the overall problem I have with this particular development proposal is it's a very large space that's going to be paved over. And I've spoken to this before, and I spoke to Mr. Dixon when he made his presentation. I have concerns about the permeability and the lack of it that's taking place on airport lands. And maybe it won't affect our infrastructure now, but I'm worried about the future if this continues. I'm worried about the heat retention that's going to happen if we have continued hot summers, in particular for that neighborhood. It's just going to suck it in and spit it right back out. It's just so much of the space being paved over. And so that's just something I wanted to put out there for council, that from an environmental perspective and climate change, it really concerns me that this is a pattern we're following in that area. I would have preferred an industry use that was more of a blend with green space rather than just boom, concrete and boxes. But I'll speak to, I'll let you go through all the rest of it, and maybe I'll bring up a recommendation about the two-way aisle at the very end, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Does any further discussion on the preamble? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. So I'll now say that the first recommendation is on the floor. It was previously moved and seconded. Any further discussion with the amended first recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries, and so we do have the second recommendation.
Number 2, that the perimeter fence be removed or modified to provide a densely landscaped visual barrier for the proposed development.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Fallon?
Is this the place to put the amendment for convex mirrors at the entrance on both sides?
I think if we're having we may have a motion with regards to drive aisles. I think
Okay,
the
we'll do it
mirrors might
separately.
be more
Okay,
applicable
that's
to the
fine.
drive aisles. Thank you for that. Seeing no further discussion on this, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Councillor O'Toole?
3, that the civil engineer retained by the applicant communicate with the town's engineering department regarding civil design and frontage improvements in order to resolve any issues prior to issuance of a building permit by the VAA.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries.
4, that the applicant addresses the non-conforming dimensions of pylon signage.
Second.
Any discussion? I just want to I started to comment in terms of the need for certain aspects of this sign, but the fact that this is a very large sign, and I realize it's in an industrial area and this particular site is several acres, but I don't understand the purpose for such a large sign. And I just hope it's, you know, within it that consideration is given that that they address the non-conforming dimensions. All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries.
5, that the applicant addresses the shortage of accessible parking spaces on site.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries.
6, that the applicant provides class 1 bicycle parking on site.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Garnett? Oh, you're anticipating? All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries.
7, that the applicant provides a decorative wrap or landscape screening for on-site utility kiosks.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries.
8, that the applicant install a new fire hydrant on the northeast corner of the property and that a key vault be located at the front gate of the development.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you, Councillor O'Toole.
I'd like to suggest a further item, if I may. 9, that the Victoria Airport Authority look to clarify the intended uses of the tenants' warehouse and office spaces.
Second.
And I'll speak to that if I may. You know, I think one of the reasons we struggled with this was that there wasn't any clarity around specifics for intended uses, from everything from the signage to the parking to the volume of office space that's included here. So I would like to see staff go back. I recognize this is not a recommendation for them to look to improve, but it's a recommendation for them to come back to us with some clarity around the project. Thank you.
Councillor O'Toole, I'll just ask the question in terms of process. If we're making recommendations this evening and they go forward to the airport authority, how that information, the timing of when that information would come back to us and what council would then do with it. I'll turn to Mr. Humble, perhaps. No? Did you wish to clarify that? I mean, the intent of
Well, staff had clarified that our meeting, I believe, on the 13th would have an opportunity prior to the close of the 40 days. I don't believe we're limited to submitting one list of recommendations to the VAA through this process, and that if we had something compelling come forward on the 13th, that we may well, within our 40-day time period, have the opportunity to provide some further recommendations. But I don't think there's anything limiting us to putting forward one set of recommendations.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarity. And so I would propose at the end of our recommendations that we would then make a recommendation that this come back to council on the June 13th for consideration of further recommendations. But I'll leave it there with the motion that is on the floor. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So certainly these recommendations can go forward to the VA. The question is, are they going to provide that additional information by the deadline or the timeline associated with the 13th? And they may, but they may not as well. So it's I mean, we could certainly put that out there, but it may not come forward for the 13th as well.
I think, yes, appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Humble. That council, I think, needs to appreciate that, you know, sufficient answers may not be available to us. And that would be the timeline that we would have to do it. My suggestion is that we not forward these recommendations now. Of course, if they're watching the webcast, or they will certainly see these recommendations. But but that we send all of our recommendations at one time. Councillor Wintoul?
To that point, it would be my intent to send the recommendations that we come forward with this evening, and if anything arises on the 13th, to send a second list. We wouldn't be reiterating what we've already submitted, and I only suggest that in part because it may well be an opportunity if they're coming back with any clarity on the 13th, some commitment could be made to address some of these items as a part of that process. And I'll remind Council that we certainly saw that in terms of other projects in Airport Authority lands where certainly recommendations had been recognized and had been implemented by the Airport Authority, and that this gives them more lead time to be able to digest the recommendations coming from Sidney as opposed to waiting to day 39.
I thank you for that rationale, and I would then support that the recommendations tonight go forward, but I think there would then need to be the understanding from Council that on the 13th, we wouldn't be looking to amend any of the recommendations that we've made this evening. Okay. So speaking to the motion, we've talked a little bit about process, but speaking to the motion, Councillor Keefe?
Yes, and speaking, I'm just wanting to get some clarity on what you just said. So if things come back on the 13th, you're saying that we wouldn't necessarily amend or change these things that we've already chosen, but
So just to interject, my suggestion would, for example, to not make a motion tonight on drive aisle, if or parking even, to leave ones that you think additional information provide clarity. Quite frankly, I don't know that information is going to come forward that's going to, we're going to reconsider the fence or the landscaping or those sorts of things. So I would stick to not my suggestion, a process that if we make a recommendation tonight, whatever information comes forward at a future meeting, we not reconsider the recommendations that we've already made. Does that help? Councillor Keefe?
I'm processing. Go ahead.
Councillor Rintoul?
I think that makes sense to me, certainly. The purpose of this would be if we have any items that weren't made clear this evening, and I know Councillor Garnett likely has some to put forward as well, that it gives him the opportunity to come back to us and we would address those specific items where clarity is provided at the next meeting, but not to revisit what we've done tonight, because as per the Mayor's comments, I agree. We're all comfortable moving these. These are all recommendations that we're comfortable with, so let's not circle back to those.
Yeah.
Councillor Keefe?
Yeah, no, that was my understanding as well. But on the 13th, with those other items, if we got information, additional information, such as what Councillor Rintoul is asking and some other councillors as well, that hopefully we would get that additional information, and if we had concerns, then we would just submit additional concerns. And if we didn't get the information by that time, I guess we still have the option to say that we have concerns on those things. So I'm comfortable with that process. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. So we have the 9th recommendation on the floor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And none opposed, the motion carries. Councillor Rintoul, thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. And I would make the 10th recommendation that the applicant redesign the building footprint of phase 3 of the storage facility to accommodate a two-way driveway access, and that at the start of the driveway access next to the flight path trail that mirrors be installed.
Second?
Okay. Is staff good with that, the wording of that recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett?
I've already spoken to it, so.
Councillor Powell? Councillor Keefe?
Thank you. I'm speaking and a question to Councillor Garnett and Councillor Fallot in regards to the request for mirrors. And what I'm wondering is, would we be satisfied with them looking to improve safety and sight lines at the intersection of the flight path and the driveway? So we're being quite prescriptive in saying you have to have mirrors, but I'm wondering if what we identify is the issue of sightlines and safety and ask them to address that, whether they might come back with some alternate solution about perhaps providing a greater setback or something like that. So if that would cover it.
Alternate Councillor Fallon, and then I have a comment question.
Thank you. So in response to that, I'm going to use my experience on the north end of the flight path along Mills Road, between sort of where Fickle Fig is in that area and east of there. There's quite a number of driveways that come out there. The locations that have no vegetation or minimal vegetation, you're riding along, even for pedestrians, you can see that nothing is happening and you can safely carry on. Where there's vegetation, my habit is always to brake beforehand and sort of get a sense of both can I hear and can I see if there's oncoming vehicles coming out of the, because sometimes they come at a fair clip and then break into the crosswalk. So by that time, disaster's already happened. So the fine line is the vegetation is good for a number of reasons. It's good for the air quality and our lifestyle and cooling and all of that, and to soak up surface water. It also mitigates some of the harshness of designs of whatever building is there. If we remove all of the softscaping and leave it just with an open fence and sightline, then it makes it stark. So I think there may be some things that they can do to mitigate how close the vegetation comes to the drive aisle that will improve it, but I think mirrors would, that's my solution. If they come up with something better, I'm good with that. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Keefe?
Okay, and I presume that the VAA is going to be watching this anyways, so they'll know that it's a safety thing, and so, because I agree, it's nice to have the vegetation, but if there's a way for them to perhaps have it set back more, that might address, so we'll see what they come up with.
Thank you, Councillor. My comment is that the consultant, I believe it was it Watt, on this, I mean, one of the things that they're going to be considering is the sight lines for access and egress to this commercial property. And I don't recall seeing it noted in this report that the sight lines were an issue. We're starting to comment on, depending on how much vegetation there is or isn't there, that it's going to affect the sight lines. Well, I have some confidence in the people designing this that they will take into account the amount of vegetation that should or shouldn't be there so that the sight lines are appropriate. And I'm not sure how prescriptive we can be in a motion to speak to this. And quite frankly, with mirrors, I'm not a convex mirror engineer, a concave mirror engineer, but if you're cycling at 15 kilometers an hour, how big does a mirror have to be be able to be the value to actually see? It's just gonna it would have to be an enormous mirror. Mr. Humble.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm a bit concerned about the level of detail, perhaps, and how prescriptive we're getting into the sort of the engineering aspects, the civil engineering aspects associated with the project. Staff review this at a DRC level as well, and our engineers are reviewing the reports and are looking at the site as well. So we have a number of engineering professionals that are looking at this particular project. So I think we're getting into the weeds on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And thus I won't support this recommendation. I'll turn to Councillor Fallot, then Councillor Garnett, then Councillor Duncan.
I will just rebut to that. I appreciate that professionals are looking at it and that is their job to ensure the safety. What I'm doing is raising awareness that there are other locations that aren't safe and somebody engineered them and somebody maintained them. These are commercial spaces, and if it's a wake-up call to say we haven't been maintaining our property, then so be it. But if it's not raised here that it is a concern, then I don't know when that voice needs to be raised.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just, the sightlines are in the report, but they're referring to vehicle traffic, not cycle traffic on the flight path. So that's something to keep in consideration. And as far as the two-way aisle, it's you know, they're relying on a study here that doesn't even mention the people turning into the site, and it doesn't take into consideration all that extra traffic that's going to be there in October, provided they find enough people to drive those vans. And yeah, there's always a theoretical proponent aspect of it, but from a practical use, having somebody stop and waiting to turn left, that's why I think it needs to be a two-way, so the person can, if they're turning left, if they get that gap in traffic, they're able to get in there rather than having to wait for that car to come out and causing or exacerbating situation, making it worse. So that's why I brought that motion forward. Why I brought the mayor's motion forward is because that's what Councillor Follett was mentioning earlier, and I figured it would be quicker to just do that than have an friendly amendment. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I can certainly appreciate the comments that Council have made with regards to the drive aisle, and that it doesn't meet requirements, and that I would support the portion of the motion that speaks to consideration of a two-way drive aisle. But with regards to access and egress, I'll leave a comment that I think in some cases, and I've cycled and ran and walked that flight path, is that you may have to slow down as you approach, regardless of what the design is. I mean, that's going to have to be a consideration. I think I have Councillor Duncan next.
Thank you. I share the mayor's concerns about the prescriptiveness of this, simply because we already have the third part of our recommendations is that the civil engineer retained by the applicant communicate with the town's engineering department regarding civil design, which would presumably include things like drive aisles and the town's concern about traffic flow, which our engineers would understand much better how to address than we would as lay people. And our staff have heard our concerns and would be able to bring that up with their engineers. I would have an alternate motion, you know, that would be much more in line with number 3 if we felt an additional motion was required to ensure that our staff were able to bring that up. But I feel comfortable with it, that our staff's competency at knowing that there are traffic concerns and Beacon West would have brought that forward to them if this is something that we can actually address. And convex mirrors, again, like, they're not for the pedestrians or for the bikes to see. When people install convex mirrors, they're for the drivers who are exiting to be able to use those and check whether they can see people coming and that they will stop, which is why you have to rely on the drivers to still maintain actually using the stop signs that are placed where they are, because then they stop, can check whether it's clear, and then they go. So there's really not a situation where they would be placing convex mirrors in a way that would allow pedestrians and cyclists on the trail to be able to see the oncoming cars and modify their behavior. This is us trying to do civil engineering in a way that I think will introduce more problems, and I'd rather have an alternate motion that allowed the civil engineers to work that out.
Okay, I'll turn back to Councillor Garnett.
If it's all right with the seconder, I'll remove the mirror portion of the recommendation and just carry the two-way drive aisle.
Fine.
Moved and seconded. Could I ask staff to perhaps read back with that change, friendly amendment?
So I have with that amendment that the applicant redesign for Phase 3 storage facility to accommodate for a two-way driveway aisle.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Councillor Minto.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll support the motion as amended. I think I get that we expect and we understand that staff will take good care of assessing, evaluating this, but it's a recommendation. I don't think it hurts to have it front and center and have it addressed, so I'll support the motion as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. I do have a question now that those two additional motion, or the last additional motion is, what would we be considering with motion number 9, requesting certain information? What aspects of the development would we be considering at the June 13th meeting, given what we've covered in these recommendations? Councillor Rintoul?
Motion number 9, I believe, was the one I put forward.
Yes.
I think it's going to provide clarity in part when we address intended use and the office space that's there, and not identifying its use as it relates, for example, to parking, which has already been identified as being somewhat short for Sydney's requirements, not just in terms of the accessible parking, but parking generally. So I don't know. You know what? Maybe nothing comes of it, and then we're all happy and we go on and support this. But in part, frankly, it would have just been nice to have had the opportunity to better understand, not that this is just a storage warehouse with an office in it, but a little bit about who's coming to the community. And if it's being built on spec, then that's fine. Tell us that. But it's a bit of a surprise, frankly, to not know who it is who's coming in, and if the airport didn't have to be here, that's fine. They've got their development procedures. Our staff work very well with them. I get that. But why isn't the developer here to talk about it, the project, etc.? So yeah, I want to hear more about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have 10 recommendations. Are there any further recommendations from Council? Seeing none, thank you, Council. We've concluded that item, and we'll move. Oh, sorry, we do have a motion. I recommended a motion that we
June 13th.
That we submit these recommendations and bring the matter to the June 13th meeting for consideration of further recommendations. I will make that motion if there's a seconder.
Second.
Seconder. Any discussion? All in favor? None opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we're to section 7, adoption of minutes. We have the minutes from our special council meeting of May 5th.
I'll move adoption.
Second.
Sorry, do we have a second?
Yep.
Sorry, I just didn't hear. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries, and we have the minute under 7B, the minutes of our regular council meeting of May 9th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any errors, omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries. We move to section 9, which is rise and report from our closed meeting of May 9th. Council passed the following resolution, which I'll read for information, for public information. And the resolution was that the following persons be appointed to the Sandwich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. Number 1, Charlene Froome, North Sandwich resident, a 2-year term to December 2023. Number 2, Vanessa Pettinger, Sydney resident, for a 2-year term to December 2023. Number 3, David Willows, Central Sandwich resident, for a 2-year term to December 2023. Number 4, David Ryder, Sydney resident, a 1-year term to December 2022. Number 5, Dale Simon, Sydney resident, 1-year term to December 2022. And number 6, Lee York, Sydney resident, 1-year term to December 2022. I want to thank all applicants for putting their names forward, and thank you to all the appointees in advance for making a commitment to volunteer their time to serve on this new peninsula-wide tri-municipal committee. I don't have a mayor's report this evening. We'll move to councillor's report, and I'll first turn to Councillor Garnett, our liaison to the Sidney Museum Archives. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Attended the last board meeting for the Sidney Museum Archives on May 14th. At the meeting, the board voted to remove the reduced occupant capacity as well as the state of emergency. with the caveat that they could bring it back quickly if needed. They had worked with the fire department and had established a capacity of, I believe, 262 individuals. From a financial perspective, the museum remains in a solid position as of April 30th, 2022. A very positive note is that donations for the first 4 months of the year to April 30th are just over 21,500, which is actually 86% of the budgeted 25,000 for the year. So they still have 8 months to get $3,500, and I'm very hopeful they'll exceed it. The suitcase project welcomed less than 300 people in April. However, the feedback has been very positive, and most people have come to attend the exhibit, came for the express purpose of viewing this exhibit. And the average donation was $9 per visitor, which is pretty much double what they normally get. So this is a great thing as well. It runs till July 4th, and again, as I said before at the previous council meeting regarding this, I recommend it to everybody. In relating to that, Kayla Isamura, who is the artist behind the suitcase project, will be at the museum this Sunday, May 29th, for an artist talk. It'll take place in the multi-purpose room between 3 and 4 p.m. The Education and Outreach Coordinator will moderate the discussion and will be on hand to facilitate a brief question and answer period. There will also be a tour of the exhibition led by Kayla, and the event will be open to volunteers and staff as well as the general public, and admission will be by donation. I'll end my report with an update on the staffing, which last time didn't seem so great, but it's in really good position now, and it didn't take long. They filled every position. The new executive director is Mr. Michael Goodchild. He's scheduled to start on June 13th, and this will be depending on housing situation, but provided that's settled, that's his start date. Miss Megan Houghton is the new assistant director and was scheduled to begin today, May 24th. Miss Jessie Johnson, who I mentioned last time, has begun her position as Education and Outreach Coordinator, and apparently by all accounts is doing a fabulous job already. They're very impressed. And finally, Miss Avery Cobby has begun her 16-week summer student position. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to Sidney to all of the new staff members at the museum. Thank you, Mayor. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Appreciate the update. I'll move the recommendation that the verbal update on the Sidney Museum and Archives be received for information.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. I'll next turn to Councillor Duncan, our representative on the CRD Regional Water Supply, and she has a written report, and then she will have a second report.
Thank you. So this was our big item Wednesday's meeting for the CRD. The 30-year planning for the regional water supply, the changes to our infrastructure that they're planning to be built, that will be planned to be built over the next 30 years, takes us to 2050. But I also want to highlight that some of what they're looking at in terms of, population growth, water demands, changes, climate change, things like that. They're looking out to 2100 in some cases, and how we're actually looking at the resilience and the lifespan of the changes that will be made to this system. So when people look at the value of the projects, the 21 major projects that were discussed in the report, though I didn't go into detail about them here, valued at 1.53 billion, which is a really big price tag, and most of that is looking at a potential for an eventual requirement for filtration, which we currently don't have, but a number of other systems such as Comox had previously not been filtered and had to put in filtration. So it's something that the CRD staff have definitely had to put on their radar, that it may be requested by Island Health at some point, and then we're going to have to pay about $1 billion to put that in. Right now we're relying on just the fact that we take very good care of our watershed, and the water does not need to be filtered at this time. But our concern is that in terms of resilience, if there was a forest fire or something like that that increased the particulate matter in the lake, we would be unable to use that water, and we would be relying on trucked in water. So that's a vulnerability that they're looking at with climate change. The longer we can delay having to do that, the better. I also wanted to highlight that when we're looking at that 1.53 billion cost, or 2.05 billion in inflated dollars, it'll probably be more than that by 2050. That's the actual value of the projects, and not necessarily the total cost to the taxpayer, because they would be looking at federal grant funding, potential DCC funding options. So we might be able to reduce some of that. Most of these things, and this is I guess an interesting thing to bring up in terms of how well run our water supply system is that the 1994 report has basically outlined what we were going to do, and we haven't really changed from that 1994 report. The things that were recommended in there, like raising the dam, things like that have gone ahead. They have been done, and we haven't come up with new things. We just know these are things that have not been completed yet, and we can go ahead and do them now. So the staff have had a really good handle for a long time on what we need in this area, what our weaknesses are, and what our strengths are to build on, which is really confidence building. So the things we'll be looking at regarding the water supply is looking at new water conservation. It's just kind of continuing what we're already doing. We've been really good as a region in terms of reducing our per capita consumption, but we are going to, all of the things that we have to do to increase our water supply going into the Leach watershed, for one thing, is basically based on the demand in the summer months, the peak summer demand. So if we can reduce our peak summer demand by following the CRD's Go Golden campaign and things that reduce water summer use, that also helps us delay some of these projects and make them not required. So that's where we're talking about the refilling of a 1 in 50 year drought, and we run into a vulnerability if we have more than one in 50 year drought in a row, which becomes increasingly possible. I don't think there's anything else I want to pull out of here in our long meeting. I have the written report, and the May 18th meeting of the regional water supply has the full report that if people want to look at it, they can go forward and do. Do you need
No, that,
motion to receive
yeah,
it?
no, go ahead and make a motion to receive.
Okay, I'll move, receive my report.
Seconded?
Oh, do you have questions?
Well, we can have a
Questions, of
question,
course.
we can have discussion questions after we second it.
Okay, I'll second.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the report, and I feel some level of confidence that there's knowledgeable people looking at this stuff and thinking so far ahead to look after our water supply. Just one question I had. It talks about exceeding estimated to exceed the current soup lake supply by 2045. And they were talking about that's based on a 1.25% year projected. So that's based on population.
1.25%. And I should highlight that right now we're only growing at about 1%, and that the maximum modeled was 1.5. And so they took kind of the average. So we're actually looking at a higher amount than has actually been seen when we come up with by 2045. Yeah.
Actually, so when we're coming up with that estimate for 2045, is it based only on projected population growth and projected use, or is it also factoring in, say, declining precipitation levels due to climate change over the next, over that period?
Yeah, it is, and that's where the paragraph where I say it's resilient to the refilling up to the 1 in 50 year drought. And so what they do, if you look, they have many graphs in their report. They'll have a graph that's got 8 or 10 different lines that shows the different population projections, and if people use right now, I think they've modeled it for 360 liters per person, 366 liters per person, but in reality over the past few years we've been using 336 liters per person. And so they kind of look at both if our consumption stayed the same, if our consumption goes up per capita, and then what that looks like at using that as the population increases by 1.25% per year, and then looking at all of the different and looking at different moisture scenarios. So after a 1 in 50 year drought is kind of the one that they use as their target there, about how low the water reservoir would go, and then how long it takes to refill based on those different consumption rates.
Good, thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And Councillor Duncan is our council liaison to the Peninsula Streams and Shorelines Society, and you have an update, verbal update.
Yeah, so they had a meeting though on, it was last week as well, Wednesday night, and so I just wanted to quickly say, because they have their AGM this Saturday, so it's a good time, public who are watching, if you want to join this great organization, this would be a good time to get your membership and be able to attend. As the mayor has just said their new name, they've been Peninsula Streams all this time, but now they do a lot of shoreline work. Probably the majority of what they do is shoreline work, so they're looking to change that name to better represent what they've been doing now. And so I just wanted to bring up that they've been in operation now for 20 years. And originally 3 municipalities on the peninsula supported them. Now there's 10 municipalities that support. They're not even the peninsula anymore. They're really throughout the entire region. So maybe there'll be another name change soon. Their beach program, I don't remember what the acronym was for, where they monitor for the fish eggs on the beaches. They trained 200 people this year alone. So they've been doing that since 2018. They have 50 regulars who do that. So their citizen science program is really impressive. And what I wanted to pull out of that is the role that Sidney has in this, and their fantastically large list of programs they do, and the 90 sites, it's 150 sites they monitor on 90 different beaches around the Greater Victoria area. Roberts Bay and Sam Harbour and are the hot spots for I can't remember what the SS was. It was the type of the surf smelt. Surf smelt. So Pacific sand lance is the species of forage fish that they look for. Surf smelt and Pacific sand lance. Our region, for some reason, has more Pacific sand lance than anywhere else that they do this monitoring in the Salish Sea, or they don't know why. And conversely, Roberts Bay and Sam Harbour are the hot spot within our region for surf smelt. So we have a very unique type of beach here, which is why it's great for us to spend as much time as we do talking about protecting this area. As well, I think we brought up before that they had their blue carbon research grant. They'll be doing more restoration work starting this summer on the Mermaid Creek Marsh. The work that they've done so far to map the ecosystem changes there show about a 50% loss of that salt scrub, or that little salt plant, just over the past year, due to those changing wave action and changing storm surge. So it's really good to see that they're going to start looking at kind of some experimental ecosystem restoration there this summer, and I think that will be all I pull out for now.
Thank you for the update. If you'd like to move your report.
Oh, move receipt of my verbal report.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Duncan. We have no committee reports. We'll turn to staff reports, and the first is item 13A, the street vending license application from Island Treats, and we have a recommendation. Sorry, Councillor Keefe, do you want to ask a question?
Question first to staff.
We'll have questions before motions. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So just a couple of questions through you to staff. So the first one is about the requirement for the vending cart to remain mobile at all times. And I guess I'm kind of inclined to remove that as a condition, because my understanding is that I think our intention with that is that we didn't want people to be taking away from brick and mortar, restaurants and cafes, and so that was one of the reasons. But I'm wondering, since recommendation 6 talks about that they can't operate within the commercial downtown area anyway, so that takes that issue sort of out of the equation. And I'm just thinking, like a vending cart like this that doesn't have music playing to advertise to the people around that we're here, I think it seems unrealistic for them to have to keep mobile all the time. And I don't see that there would be a problem, say, for example, or I'm wondering, I guess my question to staff, would we anticipate any problems if we removed that requirement to stay mobile, and that would allow them to stay, say, at Iroquois Park or at Tallista Park? And even if we wanted to put a limit on it of, that they couldn't stay in one place for an hour. So just question to staff whether you would see any issues if we remove that particular requirement.
Good evening, Mr. Newcomb.
Good evening. So through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, if I recall correctly, the original purpose of that was to essentially prevent any vendor from sort of setting up in one place for an entire day and almost like staking out a territory in a municipal park or something like that. The intent is to not have businesses setting up on private property in a way that sort of makes that their location, so to speak. So certainly, a slightly different condition along the lines of, no more than 2 hours in a certain location or something like that might address that. And it's up to council in terms of how long that might be, I suppose.
Okay. And one more, if I may?
Please.
Yeah, and so my second question is about, I noticed that the policy requires that vendors have to come forward every year to council to renew their license. And I'm wondering what staff's opinion might be if we were to amend the policy to allow staff to approve renewal of annual licenses as long as there was no problems the previous year, just to remove another bureaucratic hurdle and to save council some time as well.
Yeah, again, I think that's a amendment to the policy that we could certainly bring forward for council's consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions before the recommendations? Seeing none, Councillor Garnett? Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, I was going to suggest you should probably make the recommendation since you want some change.
Please do.
Okay, I'll move the recommendation that Island Treats be granted approval for a 2022 business license to operate 2 bicycle vending carts for the purpose of retail sales of ice cream products from public property, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the applicant meets all requirements of street vending policy DV010. Number 2, that prior to issuance of the business license, the applicant provide proof of Vancouver Island Health Authority approval and the required liability insurance. Number 3, that waste generated from the business be prohibited from being deposited in municipal waste containers. Number 4, that the business license be limited to the retail sale of ice cream products only. And this one will be a bit different, that the vending carts are not to remain in one location for more than 2 hours. And number 6, that the carts be restricted from conducting business in areas designated as COM1 in the town's official community plan, as well as Beacon Park, Bevan Park, and including pedestrian trails and paths.
Second?
We have a seconder. Do you wish to motivate further, Councillor?
I think I covered it.
Any discussion? Councillor Until?
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I'm just curious to circle back to the change to the recommendation in the 5th part of the recommendation, and that is, I mean, we heard from the applicant that they were content to operate in the same manner as they had previously. This wording is in keeping with how this had been addressed previously. I guess I see that the intent and appreciate the intent that was there to address things like your concern from brick and mortar businesses that sell ice cream. If someone, you know, is permitted in a portable environment, you know, to sit in a location for a couple of hours and move, you know, a few meters, sit another 2 hours. Not that that would happen, but that's, I guess that's my concern. I think, I thought the wording that the applicant was comfortable with it, and that we were previously as well. So I'm a little concerned with the fifth bullet. So I'll look to see if colleagues have any concern with the change as well.
I'll turn to Councillor Garnett and then myself.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess what I would appreciate about the change is the fact that, given how restrictive it reads like that, it gives allowances for a lunch break. I mean, they're working from 11 a.m. to sundown, or even just to go to the bathroom or something. Because I mean, you could allow for that, but technically you could say, well, you got to be mobile at all times. So at least within, if they're for 2 hours, they can stop and have a lunch break somewhere, or you know, if they have to go to the bathroom or something like that, take care of something that arises or whatever outside of, you know, normal working. That's the only thing. It gives a bit of freeway for them to adjust to whatever might happen in terms of what happens in different days. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not in support of the amended portion of the item, and speak further to Councillor O'Toole's items. When you set this policy, you take a look at what enforcement is. I mean, who's going to be keeping track of 2 hours and reporting it? How is that going to be enforced? I think the understanding, as Councillor O'Toole indicated, that the proponent is prepared to operate in a similar fashion. If they have to stop for a washroom break, that's not going to be violating the policy. So I won't support the motion unless it's amended back to the staff recommendation. Or I'll break that. What number is it?
5.
It's number 5. I'm going to break number 5 out, and so we're now considering all sections except number 5. Is there any further discussion on any of the other points? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. So we have on the floor now Councillor O'Keefe's motion with a 2-hour limit, and I've indicated that I won't support that motion. I'll turn to first-time speaker Councillor Duncan, and then back to Councillor O'Keefe.
I'm comfortable with this either way, simply because the proponent came back and was able to operate this way, and obviously the understanding of bathroom breaks and probably lunch breaks, they probably went somewhere a bit, you know, off of the track to make it clear that they weren't vending at the time. So it was workable, and I also know I'm not neutral about this application. This was awesome for kids when it was at the splash park, or actually the panorama, like the play in the park things when they had those set up during in special days. So I would say their carts were probably vending so constantly during that time that they in reality end up parked for quite a while as all of the parents and children there and just clean them out. The other thing is to the mayor's point of it would be enforcement based, complaints based, and I don't know that there'd be anybody watching them if they actually, you know, stopped at Iroquois Park for a little while, that anyone's going to complain because they're all just so excited that they're like the ice cream truck people are there and they're looking for them. So that would be the only thing that I could see, is that by allowing them to have 2 hours where they could actually, you know, park in the high traffic locations where people are starting to get used to the idea that they might come by and anticipate that they'd be able to get some treats there when they took their kids to the splash park or the play in the park, that they'd know that they might actually be there for a block of time. However, I also know that they were so popular there that they were likely to be there for that block of time vending anyway before they went away. So I can go either way on this. I don't think it's going to make a big impact to how they'll be able to operate.
So still with first-time speaker Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. I think the motion from Councillor O'Keefe allows the vendor the option and gives them some leeway. It's not saying they must stay in a location for 2 hours. If they are successful, it's their business plan. If they're successful keeping on the go, they will keep on the go. But by the same token, if they have an opportunity to set down in a location that has a lot of transients coming through, a lot of people coming through, moving through, and that location, and that allows the vendor to stay there because the people are moving and sell to them. So I think it just opens up their business opportunity and gives them a little bit more leeway. So I'm happy to support it.
Councillor Keefe.
Thank you. Just to address some of the comments, for me, this is about Sidney showing that we're a little bit flexible, and I think willing to try out some different sort of business models and see how this would work. And I'm not concerned about brick and mortar organizations. This, as I said before, this can be outside the downtown area. I think it adds a nice little ambiance to our parks, you know, at Iroquois or Tallista, where they might be able to park there for a little while and sell their ice cream. In terms of enforcement, I'm not bothered about that. I mean, we don't have the capacity to enforce anyways. I mean, we don't have enforcement officers running around behind the ice cream truck to say, are you still moving there? You know, so I don't see that's going to be an issue. In terms of the applicant being agreeable to this, my sense is that they're agreeable to this because we've told them they have to be, and they want to be able to operate. So they're saying, yeah, you've told us we have to do this, so we're gonna do this. So I think I'm inclined to see us lighten up a little bit and try something a little bit different. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor O'Toole and myself are opposed. The motion carries.
A motion arising?
Please.
So I would like to move that staff bring forward an amendment to the street vending policy to allow staff to approve renewal of licenses as long as there are no issues.
Second.
Moved in second, and thank you. Just going to refer a question to staff. Does no issues provide the clarity
Yeah.
that's to staff for moving forward on this? Or would there be more appropriate wording?
We can look at that, Mr. Mayor, and we'll cogitate on that. And if we come up with something that, I mean, for now, I think no issues is fine. But we may propose some different language.
I think what we're doing, in effect, is we're allowing renewal of licenses at the discretion of staff.
Yes.
If you want to amend it to make it a little
Okay,
simpler.
that staff bring forward an amendment to street vending bylaws to allow staff discretion to renew annual licenses.
Mhm.
Okay.
And the seconder was?
Yes.
Thank you. Further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Keefe. We'll go to, and thank you, Ms. Woodward, for staying with us this evening.
I guess you all get ice cream now.
There you go. We'll move to item 13B, which is the bike rack cost sharing policy WS-022, and I'll turn to Ms. Clary for an introduction, please. Hello again.
So this report is bringing forward a bike rack cost sharing policy. During the 2022 budget deliberations, Council did approve a $5,000 budget for bollard style bike racks that would have supplied and installed approximately three bike racks in Sydney. We don't have a firm policy on where to install them, and we were approached by a business about installing one outside of their business within the towns right away. So to make sure that bike racks are going in locations where they're actually needed, and also to stretch the approved budget, staff are bringing forward this bike rack sharing cost bike rack cost sharing policy. And that would see the businesses pay for the actual cost of the bike rack, and the town would install it and be responsible for all future maintenance, and they would actually be the owner of the bike rack. And there's additional information in the report, but I'm here for questions if you have any.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just one question through you to Ms. Clary. So I'm looking at the policy on the number 1 bullet there, and I'm wondering whether we might provide some clarity there so that it reads, when a request for the installation of a bike rack, and I was going to insert on town property, is received from a local business. So to clarify that this is only going to be, or I guess my question is that the intention, that we would only use this policy if the request comes to install the bike rack on town property?
Yes, that is the intention. And if someone wanted to install a bike rack on private property, this is referenced in the report, but we would just tell them they would be responsible for installing their own bike rack that they would own. So the policy would not be for private property, but we can add something in there to clarify that.
So I was just proposing to add just after bike rack, to add in on town property. Would that?
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. If I might make this suggestion, there's the first sentence, the purpose of this policy is to support the installation of bike racks on public property through cost sharing. And we could just insert it there. It's at the, rather than a particular item.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, if you'd like to move that as a, sorry, we're still at questions. We'll wait till questions.
Right, okay. So, yeah, that's the only question I had.
Any further questions? We'll let you proceed with an amendment if you want to proceed. If you want to move the staff recommendation with that amendment.
Okay, I will, move the staff recommendation that policy WS 022, bike rack cost sharing, be approved with an amendment in the preamble to read, the purpose of this policy is to support the installation of bike racks on town property through cost sharing with interested businesses.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. And we'll turn to item 13C, which is the 2022 Strategic Priorities Fund Capacity Building Stream Grant, and we have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that staff be authorized to apply for Strategic Priorities Fund's 2022 intake to fund the development of the wastewater, stormwater, and water networks asset management plans and asset management software purchase, and to provide grant management if successful.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Garnett? No. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? The motion carries. We're on to 13D, the CRD Regional Public Electric Vehicle Charging Network Grant Application. And I'll turn to Ms. Clary for an introduction, please.
Thank you. So the CRD is planning to apply for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program funds for a regional EV charging network. They've met with municipalities through the region, and the town's come up with 6 locations for EV charging stations that would be fairly easy to install. 4 of them would replace our existing public EV chargers. So the intent would be that the CRD would maintain and operate them moving forward if they were successful with this grant. And 2 of them would be new charging stations, one of them on the Green Glade Community Center property, which is actually owned by the CRD, but they still requested that we include it in this resolution. And one of them would be in the town's downtown employee parking lot. And there are many details to still sort out about this program that would have to be sorted out if they were successful, including land access agreements and long-term maintenance and hydro, who pays for the hydro and all of that. But this is really just approval in principle to allow them to apply for the grant.
Thank you. I'll turn to turn to council if there are any questions. Seeing Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple questions through you to staff, and maybe these are still those things to be worked out. But I remember when we discussed EV stations, I think a couple years ago, and whether to charge or not to charge money, I mean, not electricity. And so I'm wondering with these EV charging stations, you mentioned the CRD would continue to maintain and operate them on an ongoing basis? And would they be ones where people would have to pay, which would be different than how we've operated in the past?
Yes, through to Councillor O'Keefe. I believe the intent of these chargers would be to charge money for the time use of them, but that would really be, hopefully, once all the details are sorted out, up to the CRD to determine, like the BC Hydro Fast Charger. And originally it was free to use that, but they have since implemented a fee to actually use it. So the CRD could choose when they wanted to do that.
Okay, and one more, if I may. And if, say, in the future, we decided we wanted to add some other EV charging stations, say at Rest Haven Park or, you know, wherever, would we still be able to tap into that program, or is this kind of like a one-shot thing?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, that wouldn't be part of this grant application. The actual locations aren't set in stone, so there is some opportunity for movement. However, we did look at other locations in Sydney, and electricity supply isn't easy at some other locations, so it would be more complicated to actually get EV chargers, for example, at Rest Haven Park. But there's always an opportunity in the future to have it connected to the regional network. We would just have to work with CRD on whatever agreements would have to be in place.
Right, okay, that's great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And so we do, if there are no further questions, we have a recommendation.
I'll move that the town of Sydney participate in the CRD-led Regional Public Electric Vehicle Charging Network Project Grant application to the ICIP Clean BC Communities Grant Fund Program. And I don't see a reason to split these, so I'll just move them both. And that council approve in principle 6 sites within the town of Sydney to install level 2 public EV charging stations. And if the grant application is successful, bring forward an access agreement for consideration at a future council meeting.
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan? No. Discussion, Councillor O'Keefe.
Sorry, one more question through you to staff. I don't know enough about EV charging stations to know. Do they also accommodate EV bikes or just cars?
That's a question through to staff.
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, my understanding is a typical EV bike just plugs into a regular outlet, and these would not be just regular outlets. However, we do have several regular outlets around town that people could plug into for bike charging.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you. And we'll turn to item 13E, the 2021 SOFI Report. Did staff, I'll turn to Mr. Hisek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not so much in the way of an introduction, because this is an annual reporting mechanism that we're used to. Just to correct one discrepancy, the staff report is correct in that this needs to be approved by council, whereas the agenda indicates received for information. So it does require approval.
So a motion would be to approve the 2021 SOFI report, and just for the public's benefit that don't have the agenda before them, it's the Statement of Financial Information. If someone would like to move that recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that the 2021 SOFI report be approved.
Second.
Any discussion, questions? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed?
Oh, no.
None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move to 13F, which is the Sydney Concert Band event, a report from staff, and we have a recommendation. I'll turn to Mr. Humble. Did staff wish to introduce this, Mr. Humble? Okay, Ms. Clary?
Sure, yes, I can introduce this. So this report is kind of broken into two things. One is about the Sydney Concert Band's request for amplification in Beacon Park Pavilion on June 26th. Staff are recommending that that be approved. The next part is referring to public washrooms, portable public washrooms, which is a requirement for the event. The Sydney Concert Band is asking for either that requirement be waived, specifically if their event is less than 1 hour, or just waived in general is another option council could consider, or if the town would supply the portable public washrooms. Staff have looked into it and found some options for having portable public washrooms in Beacon Park through the summer months. We could do that with cleaning once or twice a week, or there could be locked during non-event times if that was what something council wanted to do. Yes, that's. I just want to be clear that this would be a temporary measure just for this summer from June to September, and we will likely receive complaints about visual impacts of having portable washrooms in Beacon Park, but there aren't really many other options other than kind of right behind the pavilion where they typically are for events. So just to make council aware of that. So yes, there may be some discussion. I'm here for questions if you have any.
No, thank you, Ms. Clary. We appreciate that separating those motions, and we will separate them, but I'll turn to Councillor Garnett and Councillor Keith.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. I have a little concern about them being there for 4 straight months. So I'm wondering, is it possible that we can put some kind of screening around them just so that they're not just like blank there to look at for tourists all summer long?
Through to Councillor Garnett, that's something we could consider. It may not look, it may be a bit expensive to have something look really nice, but we could look at some construction screening type fencing. We could look at options and bring it back if that was something you wanted to consider.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Did you have a question, Councillor Keith? I'll let you go ahead and then I have a question. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm in support of us, the town, providing the washroom. So thank you to staff for going and doing the homework and giving us some amounts. One thing I'm wondering about is, first of all, the cleaning of them. So when we talk about 2 times a week cleaning schedule, does that mean somebody, like, they clean out the holding tanks twice a week? Does that also mean that they go in there, like, who actually goes in there and cleans it up and fills up the toilet paper and the hand sanitizer? Is that on a daily basis, or is that also included in that twice a week?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, they will come and clean it. So they come and hydrovac out materials, and then they spray it down with a disinfectant. As far as the hand sanitizer, I know there was a fee for the refills, so I'm not sure if we get those and can install them ourselves, but we can confirm that and get back to you.
Actually, that's okay. I was just wanting to confirm how often they actually get cleaned. So it's not a daily thing then, it would be twice a week. Okay.
Yes.
If we found that wasn't frequent enough, do we have the option to have additional cleaning, or is that?
Councillor Keefe, if I might interject for a moment, the town is currently operating public washrooms on 4th Street. I think we can, given that they're going to be these washrooms are going to be on public property, I think, staff can monitor them and determine what the appropriate service level is.
Okay, well, that's what my question was.
Given that we operate town
so I didn't know if town staff, that's something town staff did, or that was something that the contractor did. Okay, and then my other question, Ms. Clary?
Sorry, I'm through to Councillor Keefe about the cleaning. We do have a janitorial contractor who comes and cleans the other town public facilities, so it would be a change to their current contract if we wanted to get them in to clean. We don't have any costs on that at this time, but we could ask them.
Right, okay. And then my final question was about adding another unit. I guess what I'm concerned about is whether 2 units would actually be enough. So I would be inclined to add another unit. And so is my understanding correct that if we added another unit with similar twice a week cleaning schedule, that would be roughly about $1,500 for the summer? I'm just trying to figure that out based on the information that you sent.
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, I'd say very roughly, there are a number of fees and charges. There's the sewage discharge fee as well, which we don't have numbers on. So I would say roughly between $1,500 and $2,000 to add another one.
Okay, and so if we were to add another unit, and maybe that's a question for our financial person, whether we could find an extra $1,500 or $2,000 to add another unit.
It's the same answer, Councillor, is in the report, just multiply by 1.5. So we currently don't necessarily have the budget to accommodate this, so it could either curtail events or we'd be over and we'd try and make it up in other budget areas.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? We do have a recommendation before us, and I will ask that we separate them and just move the first one.
I'll move that the Sydney Concert Band's use of amplification during their June 26, 2022 performance at Beacon Park be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. I do have a question before we go on to the second one, and I apologize if it was in the report and I missed it, although I have read it. Did staff give consideration to, or is it even practical in the sense of what we have available in Public Works to store this public washroom at the Parks Yard and just move it for events to Beacon Park?
Through to the mayor, that was something we discussed. However, these portable washrooms have policies that you're not supposed to move them. Otherwise, you break them, you buy them. So yeah, we're not supposed to move them if they're rentals. If we were to purchase our own, we could do that. However, to purchase our own, we would be waiting into September to get one at this point because they're so in such high demand right now.
Certainly, thank you for that. I'll wait till the motion is moved.
I'll move that town staff be directed to arrange for the rental of one standard and one accessible portable toilet for the 2022 summer event season at Beacon Park.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor O'Toole, the mover, and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very comfortable with proceeding on this basis, recognizing that staff will note that if cleaning is not regular enough, that will be addressed. That if 2 toilets aren't enough, that will be discussed and addressed, and that we don't need to micromanage this, at this level. I think for the season, I think it's look. We'd intended to have washrooms at a nearby location for this summer, and with procurement and other factors, I get that that's falling behind. So this is a great step, I think, to encourage use of the park and provide some public facilities that I'm happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The seconder is okay. Attorney Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I'm in favor of having these there for the summer. My only thing is I think we should be having 2 standard ones and 1 accessible. And it's to me, it's not micromanaging. It's being proactive and anticipating that. I don't think 2 washrooms down there is gonna be sufficient. Yes, staff could certainly, at some point, if we get complaints, try and address it, but what I note from the report is that there's some concern about being able to rent these, that they seem to be in short supply. So I guess what I'm trying to do is be proactive and anticipating that we're gonna have a lot more people out and about this year. People, since COVID, are traveling more. We're gonna have more visitors coming to the area. I think we're going to be having a lot of events. This is something that we've heard from the SBIA and the Chamber for several years. So I'd like to see us put in 2 standard and 1 accessible right from the get-go, and know that we're good for the summer, and staff don't have to worry about trying to find another one later on, which I think would be difficult. Would you consider that amendment?
No.
Well,
Okay.
sorry, it's, you have the option of moving that amendment, Councillor, and then it goes before council.
Okay, I'll move that we amend the recommendation to have 2 standard and 1 accessible portable toilet.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Second, we have it seconded for discussion. I think Councillor O'Keefe is motivated. Councillor Fallon?
We're good.
Anyone else wish to speak to it? I won't support the amendment. I'm happy to go with the staff recommendation. I don't know what basis, we can have to suggest there should be X number of public washrooms down there. And so I'm comfortable with the staff recommendation. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, myself, Councillor O'Toole opposed. The motion is defeated. We have the main motion on the floor, which is the staff recommendation. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, and thank you to staff for bringing this forward. Sorry, I'm not forecasting, because I just really don't know, but I have a sense we will receive some feedback. The fact that 2 portable washrooms are in this park, probably our most prominent park, for 4 months. Mr. Humble? And just to further comment, Councillor Garnett, I believe, made reference to screening, that sort of thing. I think the more we add to this, the more concern is that this is something permanent. Mr. Humble?
Yeah, I would speculate, I would guarantee that we're gonna receive concerns. We did receive concerns during a previous event where we had a number of portable washrooms that were visible, in particular from the adjacent strata. And so I guarantee that we're gonna receive some comments. I think it's gonna be challenging to screen them, in particular that if they have to be accessed on a regular basis for cleaning, etc., that screening could be a challenge, just in terms of how you access the facilities to empty the tanks, etc., and ultimately clean them. So we'll see what we can do.
Thank you. With them being located on the causeway, I mean, it could be the west face or something, just a screening on the one side. I'll leave it to staff. Again, I don't want to forecast, but thank you, Council. We'll move to the next item, which is the 13G, the monthly building permit report for April.
Move receipt.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. We'll move to section 14, which is correspondence. We have 2 items to consider this evening. Item 14A is a request to close Mermaid Creek Path, and we have an email from the Roberts Bay Residents Steering Committee dated May the 4th. I would turn to staff, I would turn to council if they have any questions of staff. We've had a request come forward, as is indicated in last year, and a response, but if there are any questions from staff. Mr. Humble, did you want to introduce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to indicate that, well, the recommendation is to receive for information. Certainly, it's open to council to consider referring this potentially to staff to actually consider options around fencing, costs, that kind of thing, what the pros and cons are associated with that. I think certainly staff have looked at the fencing option in the past and some of the challenges associated with that, but we could again bring that forward. There is the other option that we could bring it forward for consideration closer to the next budget, the next round of budget consideration as well. And then there's strategic planning to consider as well. So there's a number of options beyond receipt for information.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole and Councillor O'Keefe.
I was going to put forward a motion.
Councillor O'Keefe, unless you have a question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, from Mr. Humble. So in terms of looking, you mentioned staff have looked at maybe some options, and I'm wondering, in terms of costs, is this something that would be significant enough that would require an alteration to our budget? Or do they have any sense of, is this something that, we've got some fencing in the works yard and we could go out there in a day and do it? I'm just trying to get, if you have a rough sense of the complexity and the cost.
Yeah, Ms. Clary might be in a better position to respond to your question, Councillor O'Keefe. I think there's just some real challenges around the practicality associated with incorporating a chain link fence at the one end, at the northwest corner of the park. It's indicated and it's recognized by Ms. Gifford that there are some real challenges associated with installing a fence along the waterside portion. So again, just some concerns about the practicality of that fence option. I'm not sure if Ms. Clary wants to comment on costs, but I don't think there's fence that we have lying around that's going to potentially be able to address this. And I'm not sure, again, what other options there are. It's a challenging area. Certainly the staff supported the idea of signage, but again, as noted by Ms. Gifford, signage was removed and discarded, and so we've tried a few times with the signage option.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I think if we make a motion to refer to staff to bring forward options, that will include the costs, and we can ascertain at that time.
Thank you. I'll move that staff report back on feasibility and cost of fencing off access to the path.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I support the motion. One thing I would be interested in hearing from staff is whether actually fencing this off to pedestrian traffic, in their opinion, is going to have a significant impact on the degradation of the bank. And I think that was one of the things that we struggled with last time, is even if we do this, is a few pedestrians going along that path. Is that the main issue? My recollection, it had more to do with stormwater and other issues. So I'd hate to see us go through this process of putting up fencing when it wasn't, if it's not going to have a significant impact. So I'd be interested in hearing more on that when it comes back.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Mr. Humble?
Yeah, and staff, I think, in their report would highlight some of those challenges and again try to determine or provide for council any other potential options beyond fencing that might be worth considering. And I don't know what those are, but we'll bring that forward.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. So we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. And I remember this conversation before about the fencing and about fences at either end. And I can't remember whether the challenge was simply that was actually that the town didn't have, you know, like the rights just because of the way that land is zoned on the beach side to actually build a fence there, or that it was impractical. And I'm just wondering, I guess through you to staff, maybe Ms. Clary can clarify what the limitation was on that side, because I don't think if we don't block off both sides, I don't think it's going to matter, because a lot of that access is actually from the people in the houses who live there, who are clearly using, you know, like hedge trimming equipment to maintain their access from their gates out onto that trail and to the beach. And so just blocking it off to the public isn't going to help the fact that the private that people are using it as their own private yards to get to the beach.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Ms. Clary.
Through to Councillor Duncan, there are definitely some challenges with installing fencing on the beach. There's always challenges with doing any sort of construction in an environmentally sensitive area. So it would have to be well planned out if that was something we wanted to do.
I guess what I picture is like this kind of, you know, split rail looking fencing that they put around, you know, for ecosystem restoration in some parks when they've got, you know, the invasive plants and they want to keep dogs and people out, and they're low and they're split rail. And, you know, then it wouldn't require, you know, the anchoring that a metal fence might need. But if we're capable of evaluating both sides, blocking both sides of that trail, I think that might be the only way we're going to actually make a difference, if it will indeed.
Thank you, Councillor.
Like
Ms. Clary, please.
Yeah.
Sorry, through to Councillor Duncan. The sign at the beach end was installed on a fairly large wooden post, and someone ripped it out and threw it in the bushes. So anything that we had installed that wasn't securely fastened, I think, will be vandalized.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Thank you, Councillor. Did you still have the floor?
Oh, thanks. No, I know I did see that sign. In fact, the first time I saw one of the signs, they'd carried it all the way from where they'd installed it at the end there and left it at the garbage can at the Ardwell Beach access. So whoever has been vandalizing these signs was really angry and really meant it. So I'm not sure whether it's a member of the public or one of the property owners there. But maybe a split rail fence would be too heavy. I don't know.
Okay, we'll leave it with staff. Further discussion? All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. And we'll go to item 14B, which is a letter from the District of Central Saanich regarding support from their multi-sport box at Centennial Park, which will serve regional needs. We have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that council support the request.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that this is a discussion, of course, that belongs at the PRC table. And as Sidney's member on the commission, and while the mayor also sits there, I know he sits there in his CRD capacity, I think mainly. That's a governance matter. But I think, to be clear, my only concern would be if this is the expectation is that Sidney would support it, that in a sense I would support it at the PRC table. You know, I think there's some clarity that needs to come with this and come out at the table, meaning that there would be due consideration given to it beyond the sentiment of support that's identified here in broad terms, and where it references design, construction, and management and operation of the multi-sport box facility. I agree it's aligned well to Panorama and its to the PRC and its role on the peninsula, absolutely. But this implies cost implications, staffing implications as well, that really need to be weighed in on from Panorama management. So while I'm happy if council would like to support this in you know, through that lens, that this is a facility for everyone on the peninsula, I'm happy to take that, point of view going in, but we'll also look, quite critically and listen to staff's input at Panorama around whether or not they've got the capacity to do this. So I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. And if I might just add that, a council motion, would show the support from council, but, the commissioners, the 9 commissioners, 3 from each municipality, do have the responsibility for taking a decision, and this is a little more complex in terms of the design, construction, and management, and that as your representatives, myself through the COD and Councillor O'Toole, would have to consider the proposals that come forward, including the considerations that the Councillor, O'Toole made. If I see no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. And we do have several items under 15 for correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. We have no notices of motion, no motion to go on camera. I'll look for motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Motion. We are adjourned. Thank you. Good evening.